This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Planning and Regeneration Committee. Thank you for joining us as we discuss the rationale for establishing a mayoral development corporation aimed at taking over the running of Oxford Street from Westminster and Camden councils. Today's meeting will be invaluable in informing the committee's response on behalf of the London Assembly to the Mayor's ongoing consultation. Before we get started, I would like to remind everyone to please switch their phones to silent mode. I also ask that members and guests position their electronic devices away from their microphones. Also, please adjust your microphones so that you can be heard clearly. If you need to adjust your microphone, please remember to pick it up from the base, not the neck. Members of the public may like to follow us at London Assembly on Twitter, I still call it Twitter, and use the hashtag Assembly Planning for this meeting. Now we have a few items of business, just brief items of business to cover. Can I now ask our committee clerk, Sal Fazal, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Assembly Members Carpet and Baker. Assembly Member Russell is attending as a substitute for Assembly Member Carpet, and Assembly Member Desai is attending as a substitute for Assembly Member Baker. Additionally, in accordance with Standing Order 8.2, Assembly Members Wilson and Bukhari are attending the meeting as observers.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if any members have any other interests to declare?
Chair, it's already in my register of interest, but I just want to declare that I am a councillor in Westminster in the Labour group that Adam leads.
Absolutely. I've read your interests, so I can confirm that. Can we confirm the minutes of the committee meetings held on the 28th of January 2025 and the 11th of February 2025? Can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from the committee's previous meetings and the additional correspondence received?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we note the action taken by me as chair of the committee under delegated authority following consultation with party group members to agree the Unlocking Development in London report?
Agreed.
Thank you. We now move on to our main item of business, a discussion on the Mayor's ongoing public consultation on the transformation of Oxford Street. I would like to welcome our first panel guests. We are joined by Councillor Adam Hugg, leader of the Council in Westminster, leader of the Council for Westminster City Council, Councillor Richard Olszewski, leader of the Council for the London Borough of Camden. And we have Dee Coursey, who is the Chief Executive of the New West End Company, and Tim Lord, Chair of the Executive Committee of the Soho Society. So I'll now move on to the questions, and I'll launch this, but many other Assembly members will be coming in. Can I ask, how will you describe the main challenges currently facing Oxford Street and the surrounding area? Let's go from left to right. Mr. Lord.
Hello, my name's Tim Lord. I'm a 30-year resident of Soho and the chair of the Soho Society and the Westminster Amenity Societies Forum. The main challenges facing Oxford Street at the moment are that it is slowly improving post-pandemic. The vacancy rate, I believe, has dropped and people are coming back. It is busier than ever. I think Dee will probably say something about the spend, not the per visitor spend is not as high as it needs to be to justify the commercial rents, and they are concerned about that. There are significant problems with candy shops, which the Mayor has identified. We believe, because we also have them in Soho, is that that's a problem with crime in terms of money laundering, and that the proper action that's required there is a police response. Because we see we lose retail shops which were paying rents of £200,000 and they get replaced by shops paying rents of £250,000. And yet you never see any customers in there. So we would really like action on that. Other than that, we think that the concerns over Oxford Street have been slightly overstated.
Thank you. Ms. Coursey.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the Chief Exec of New West End Company. We're a business improvement district, and we were set up over 20 years ago for retail, leisure and hospitality businesses, not just on Oxford Street, actually, but Oxford Street, Regent Street, Bond Street and Mayfair. So my interests are across the whole of the West End, not just Oxford Street. In terms of Oxford Street itself, it has significant national importance, actually. So Oxford Street itself contributes 5% to London's GVA, and the West End contributes 3% of the total economic output. So it is absolutely crucial for us that Oxford Street delivers and can grow where it needs to for the whole of the UK economy. In terms of the challenges that we're facing on Oxford Street, we're facing on a number of high streets, but of course this is the nation's high street, and that is it needs to respond to changing customer demands. There has been some significant investment since COVID in the buildings and the operators to make those flagship destinations something that customers want to go to. But as ever, we are grappling with changes in what our customers want. So that is really fueling the demand for something transformational on Oxford Street.
Thank you. Councillor Olszewski.
Thanks so much, Chair. Councillor Richard Olszewski, Leader of London Borough of Camden. I think the challenges mainly are a question for my colleagues in Westminster City Council, as obviously the street is in their borough, but obviously they have a read across into Camden as well. And from a Camden perspective, it's to acknowledge, I think, what Dee and Tim have said and is fairly well established about challenges facing retail as a whole, the street specifically in terms of footfall, recovery from COVID, how you deal with traffic considerations, etc. All the things you have to consider when you want to make improvements to that kind of retail visitor experience, etc. In terms of and those challenges face us in Camden as well as they do in every other borough in London, and specifically on Oxford Street. There is obviously an impact, and it has its ripples in that part of Camden that's adjacent to Oxford Street, and we've been trying to improve the local areas around there, obviously with the West End project and sort of the West Tottenham Court Road. And also more local schemes as well. But they're well known, but I think it's probably more for Adam and Westminster colleagues to grapple with. But we're here in a supporting role.
Yes. Councillor Huck.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as my colleagues have touched upon, there are a number of main buckets. There is the overall evolution of the economy and what people go to the high street for anywhere in the country, but particularly the nation's high street. Obviously, there's the issues around transport and safety, and then there's a broader sort of look and feel of the street. Now, the idea of doing something on Oxford Street has been in the ether for almost a decade now. Obviously, that has had an impact on the sort of day-to-day investment that's been going into the street. But obviously, there have been a number of changes in terms of the physical infrastructure of the street. In terms of the look and the sort of look and feel of the retail offer, that has been evolving, and we have been trying to look at the trends post-pandemic that have accelerated certain things that were already in train. It is becoming more experiential. We've now got, we've as a local authority, we've been encouraging a greater diversity of uses. Obviously, you've got the Mocket Art Museum on there. You've got a little bit more food and beverage, but not much coming in there. But you've also had big returning retail brands in terms of HMV, IKEA, Miniso, Waterstones coming back into the street. You've seen some of the changes in terms of the department stores, in terms of the upper floors being converted into offices, and you're obviously seeing a lot more office in and around that area. But the lower floors being activated again for retail and other uses. So obviously, as a council, we've been trying to work with both business and residents to try and come up with ways to support that. That's using the existing powers that we have and the work that we were doing with MWEC over a number of years on our own Oxford Street programme, because we all, I think everyone sat around this table and around London wants to see Oxford Street thrive, and we want to work pragmatically to make sure that happens, and that's the approach that we're trying to take to Oxford Street. because we know the challenges are real. Behaviour is changing. There's competition from online. There's competition from Westfield. But you have seen, as I think Dee alluded to, and others have alluded to, you have seen greater investor confidence coming back into the property sector in Oxford Street in terms of those brands that either returning or coming in. And obviously, there's a number of factors behind that. But you're seeing different changes in behaviour, certain different peaks and troughs of footfall in terms of the adaptation of when the office workers are here, and obviously different visitor behaviour. So things are changing. The street needs to respond, and we want to work to find a solution to that.
You've mentioned the work that you're doing with residents. Could you expand a little on how you do interact with residents when talking about the challenges of Oxford Street?
So we engage with our residents across the city on a whole range of different things. Over time, we have a productive relationship with our residents associations in the WASF forum that Tim leads, and others. In relation to our work around Oxford Street, our approach has been very much to try and work with both businesses and residents to try and understand what their particular interests and issues of concern are about what's going on the street now and into the future. And I think we will, that's been our approach, is to try and work with all the different stakeholders to understand where they're coming from and try and come up with responses that respond to those challenges. And
you wouldn't want to see any reduction in that that negotiation with residents?
I'm not going to dictate a particular approach, but I think all I would say is that we have found the approach that we have taken helpful over the last couple of years, where working with businesses and residents up front has yielded positive results. And whatever happens in the future, we want to make sure that residents have a strong voice in what happens in their community, and that their views are listened to and understood, alongside the different stakeholders that are involved. But obviously our view, residents need to be an important part of that. We have that relationship as a city council, and obviously we'll continue to have that relationship with our residents over many years to come. But we recognise that's something that we've done effectively over the last couple of years, we think, and want to see that continued.
And Mr. Lord, do you value that relationship that you have with Westminster Council?
Yeah, we have a quarterly meeting with Adam's team, and that actually under his administration has grown in significance. The meetings are usually attended by 40 or 50 people now, and that's been a really important relationship for us. Yeah.
Thank you. And Ms. Coursey, similarly, you liaise with Westminster Council and perhaps Camden Council as well. And is that relationship satisfactory?
Absolutely. Well? We've worked hand in glove with Westminster City Council and Councillor Hugg for the last almost 3 years, not just on Oxford Street, but of course the things across the wider West End. So we really value that relationship. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. It's in the name of Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Good morning to you all. I'm going to start with Dee on this. What are the reasons for the economic decline in Oxford Street as suggested in the Mayor's consultation document? Because you gave a picture that actually feels like Oxford Street's on the way back. His document gave a slightly different picture. So who's correct and what are the challenges?
I think if you look at Oxford Street over time, if you look at the footfall, where we've been and where we are now, the footfall has been in decline for a number of years. When you look at the shopping malls, the Westfields of the world, etc., that have opened, that footfall is probably half of where it was back in 2008, something like that. Oxford Street is being invested in by the private sector, as I touched on. We need to move with the time. So we are seeing a resurgence in Oxford Street for sure. But what we know from our research is good quality public realm is a catalyst for footfall, for dwell time, for frequency of visit, and all of those things lead to higher turnover and higher growth, which is why, we've been championing Oxford Street probably for longer than a decade, actually, to get the focus that it needs in terms of the public realm and a more pedestrian-friendly space. And if you take that further, as we touched on at the beginning, what our customers want, they want experiences, they want to be wowed, they want to be surprised and delighted. And that's something that we could look to do, working in partnership with Westminster City Council, Camden Council, and, of course, the Mayor.
Tim, if I come to you as someone who's a trader landlord, do you recognise what the Mayor is saying, or do you see it more like Dee saying it? What's your perspective?
Well, I think we must mention the fact that for the last 2 years, until September last year, Westminster City Council, NWEC, the community, the residents and all the businesses were working on a scheme to improve the public realm in Oxford Street. And that involved consensus building, working together, and the scheme was already starting. All of that work has now been lost and wasted because of a press release from the Mayor in September saying that he might consider pedestrianisation. That then triggered all the businesses to pull their funding from that scheme. And the residents are, I would say, pretty disappointed because instead of having a certainty for improvements for Oxford Street that would already be on foot, we are now back in the world of an enormously contentious, with the local community, idea about pedestrianisation, which has been proposed in the past. Every time it's proposed, we ask 3 questions, and we're still waiting for answers. We said, where's the traffic going? How will older people get to Oxford Street on buses and taxis once you pull them away? And how will the businesses get access? Now, I'm, contrary to what the Mayor says, the local community, we don't get to make any of these decisions. These decisions will be made by you and the people on this panel, but not the community. The only thing we get to do is ask questions. And all I would say is we've been asking these questions on the practicalities of removing vehicles since 2017, to my knowledge. And I just want, unless you get clear answers in the later session today, I think this is completely the wrong way round. You don't set up the MDC until you know what you want to do with it and whether that is a practical scheme. And those questions still remain.
Thank you, Tim. I'll come back to you because I think I certainly have a question around what you've just said, and I'm sure some of my colleagues do as well. So in order not to trample on people's toes, I'm going to flick back to Dee and focus on the extent to which it is possible to reinvigorate Oxford Street as a retail centre after people have shifted to online shopping, and you yourself mentioned the likes of Westfield. I happen to live in Ladbroke Grove, so I live between the two, or I don't anymore, but I used to, so I would have gone to Oxford Street, then Westfield appeared, so I probably would go there. My mum lives down there as well, so but how can you battle that and win?
Because what we are trying to achieve is not what can be replicated online. It's about very much, as Councillor Hugg touched on at the beginning, it's about the experiences. It's about what you cannot do online. It's about having a wonderful experience in a retail location or within the public realm space, which might be open to us if we do things slightly differently, that you tell your friends about either firsthand, you put it on your Instagram. It's a reason to come, it's a reason to dwell, it's a reason to do things differently. And that is how we're going to entice people back into the centre of London rather than going to some of the shopping malls and other out of London locations.
Tim, do you want to make a comment there?
Well, we hear a lot about, there is competition from online and from Westfield. The whole technology of shopping has changed, which creates a disadvantage for Oxford Street. And it may be that the rents will never be as high and the commercial property values need to drop to reflect that technology change. But all I would say, because I remember sitting through the meetings on the Westminster scheme, that, if you want to shop in Westfield, you should be allowed to shop in Westfield. You can park, and if it rains, you don't get wet. That's a realistic choice for people that Westfield gives them. Spending significant amounts of public money trying to migrate custom from Westfield to Oxford Street does not increase the tax take for the UK economy. And we've caught both the Mayor and, to some degree, Westminster City Council saying we have to do this to deliver more VAT receipts and more jobs. But that does not happen if you just migrate custom from Westfield.
Interesting.
And I think that really ought to be front of mind on some of the justifications that are being made or requested to be made about pedestrianisation, because they don't add up.
Okay, very strong point, Tim. Very strong. Chair, back to you.
Assembly Member Russell.
Yeah, just very briefly, picking up on Tim's point about you don't want to just migrate custom from Westfield, totally get that. Dee, you were talking about the importance of experiences, and I just wondered to what extent cultural uses of those spaces in Oxford Street, those upper floors, could they be used for, music, for plays, for art exhibitions? Is that part of your thinking about experiences?
Absolutely. We're already seeing on Oxford Street quite a change in the mix of use. So we're bookended, if you like, by two immersive experiences. One is the Outernet, Tottenham Court Road. One is the Frameless Museum all the way at Marble Arch. We have the Moco Museum, as Councillor Huggins touched on. We have a Boom Battle Bar, which is our competitive socialising. So in terms of the mix and having those different experiences, that's already on the way. Excuse me. So having the ability to have some live music and some other things would be fantastic for Oxford Street, for sure.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Assembly Member Mo Emma, please.
Thank you. Can I put my question to you, Dee? Good morning to all of you. So on the point about the people that are coming to shop in the West End and kind of between these two centres, I wondered if you had any thoughts about kind of international comparisons and those people that are coming from overseas to shop in Oxford Street, what any regeneration might look like to attract more of those people, because I understand it's a destination in its own right for overseas shoppers and visitors in particular, which is slightly different to a shopping mall. We have a Westfield in East London as well, and it's very much a local shopping mall, and I imagine it's the same in West London as well.
You're absolutely right. Thank you for the question. The challenge or the opportunity that we have in the West End, particularly on Oxford Street, is the fact we cater for workers, for residents, for domestic visitors, and of course our international visitors. And our international visitors are absolutely key for us. And when you look at what's happening in other European and international destinations, we don't want to get left behind. We absolutely have to do more to entice them. We need to make it a welcoming space. We need to make it a vibrant space. And it's not just about these stores. People don't just want to come and shop and eat. It's the whole experience when they're here. And to do some changes on Oxford Street and the wider West End will absolutely cement us as that global destination that we need to be for Oxford Street.
Thank you. Who have we got next? It's you again. Yes. You did.
Thank you. This is to all of you. I'd like to start with Tim and perhaps work across. To what extent would you agree with the Mayor that pedestrianisation is the best way to secure the future success of Oxford Street? And I understand that you've touched on that already, but if you could maybe expand on what you were saying, and then we'll continue along the panel.
As I've said, we've been asking for over a decade on the practicalities, and you're going to put those to Will later. But just be really aware that the temptation from the Mayor is to say we'll deal with this later. And I just think the time has been running for a long time. Just on the issue of what other activities are happening on Oxford Street, there's a statistic, a pre-pandemic statistic, that says that the percentage of employment in retail on Oxford Street is 14%, 1-4. Most of the activity on Oxford Street in terms of employment and a lot of the economic activity is in the offices. So you really need to be bearing that in mind. In terms of the international competitiveness of Oxford Street, what we believe is that it needs to have a diverse and unique offering. And one of the problems now is that you can visit many cities in the world and you will see the same brands and shops which have moved to all those places so that they can offer the same thing that London historically offered exclusively. And actually what you need to make Oxford Street succeed is a unique offering at the retail level, and that may not mean the highest commercial rents. In fact, I suspect it means the opposite. You actually have to be much more flexible on the rent levels if you're going to try and do something new and creative at the retail level. And we don't see that happening if the agenda is set by property companies as opposed to the public interest.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Dee, the same question around whether or not you agree that pedestrianisation is a way to secure success. And also, I should have asked you this, apologies, Richard, whether you think car-free days have been successful in Oxford Street to drive people to the area?
Firstly, I think creating a more pedestrian-friendly space is absolutely a positive, and that will drive some of the things we've discussed around the footfall, the dwell time, etc. If that leads to some pedestrian space, then that could open up the realms of what we could do in that space. So whether that is seasonal activations, various different things that could drive some interest and some footfall, I think would be of interest to the brands, as long as they're done sensitively with the operators that are already on the street. In terms of Oxford Street being the same as any other high street, I would disagree with that. I think the flagship stores are doing their best to provide something, not just product that you can get anywhere, but the experiences, as we've touched on, in the store. The car-free days on Oxford Street we haven't done actually for a number of years now, so I think we'd be, keen to see how they could, what that would do to the area.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Olszewski.
I think obviously again recognising that the principal authority to consider impacts and rationale, etc., is colleagues in Westminster. From a Camden perspective, we support the principle and rationale for the Mayoral Development Corporation and for pedestrianisation, but obviously, aware that doing so has its challenges, which we've heard about, and they're perfectly valid challenges. Camden as a whole, it's been, excuse the undeliberate pun, it's been the direction of our travel to in general, to seek to reduce car traffic across our borough, in specific parts of the borough as well. We're just bringing forward, for instance, a proposal to pedestrianise the upper part of Camden High Street, where we're working with TfL on that in a smaller scale, but again to make that specific part of Camden to help improve it and to make it a better visitor experience for those who wish to come there, and to support the economy in that area. We see benefits of pedestrianisation for Camden in that it could has a potential to complement what we're trying to do in the adjoining areas around Holborn and Fitzrovia and so on, possibly including perhaps some limited pedestrianisation further east on New Oxford Street and so on. So we broadly welcome it. But I mean, Tim is right. There's lots of questions that do need to be answered in more detail to come forward. That is part of the means by which you develop these kind of proposals. That's what we do in Camden. It's what Westminster does on all sorts of things. You don't necessarily come down from Mount Olympus with the tablets of stone and say, here it is, it's all been worked out. That's the whole purpose of discussions like this, and discussions that we will have together, or individual stakeholders with the Mayor and so on.
Thank you. And Councillor Hug.
Thank you. So we absolutely agree for the need for transformation of Oxford Street. Our view, as I'm sure you will appreciate, isn't that pedestrianisation is the only way to address those challenges, because obviously we had a scheme that focused on expanding the pedestrian space, delivering greenery, improved transport connectivity, lower wait times, congestion, and those sorts of things, whilst retaining end-to-end bus and taxi access. However, we recognise, obviously, the Mayor's direction of travel around pedestrianisation, and I think from our perspective, it's we're very, we've obviously raised a number of concerns about how that might be addressed, and we've found discussions with the GLA very positive over the last couple of months to try and understand some of the potential challenges and the reasons why we didn't initially go down that road. And I know I'm sure there'll be some questions on those sort of things later. I think there is a need from everyone here to get something going. Obviously, our scheme would have been starting on the ground now and completed by spring, summer of 2027. So I think there is obviously an urgency to get something going, and I think we'll be encouraging, working with the if this proceeds, working with the GLA to make sure as much of the sort of DNA of the work that we've been doing over recent years informs what goes ahead. And I think in terms of pedestrianisation, some of our particular concerns related to the eastern section, east of Oxford Circus, and what you do with the impact of the traffic changes that would flow from that. We've been obviously reassured around the proposals to do a scheme in alignment with our original plans to the east of the circus, which will mitigate some of those some of the concerns that we had about a pedestrianised scheme in particular. And I think, from a strategic level, our scheme provided sort of speed and comparative affordability. Obviously,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you pull the microphone a little closer to you?
There we go.
Thank you.
So I was saying, obviously, there is our scheme would have been sort of at the more affordable end of the spectrum in terms of how much public money was being put in and delivering at speed. But obviously, the Mayor has greater ambitions in terms of the pedestrianised space that will be coming from that. And I think our role as a local authority is to try and make sure the views of residents and other stakeholders are picked up in managing that approach. Obviously, I've explained about what can be done to manage some of the transport issues more effectively. There's issues around security that I'm sure we'll come to in a second. But as I said, we've valued the dialogue with the GLA over recent months to try and get to the bottom of some of those things which were behind our initial reasons why we didn't go down the pedestrianised route. But I think there's a lot more detail to come over the months ahead if the Mayor proceeds with the scheme. But ultimately, we are working pragmatically to make sure whatever happens is in the best interests of businesses, residents, and the visitor economy. Pedestrianisation wasn't the approach that we took. We recognise that's something where the Mayor is looking at, and I think from our perspective, if that is what happens, we need to make sure that it works effectively, and the concerns of residents and others are factored into that to make sure that it's a system that works for everybody.
Okay, thank you so much. So you've kind of touched on some areas where kind of some examples of what you wanted in your own scheme, and Tim, you've also referred to the previous scheme that was kind of this partnership working across different stakeholder groups. So it's my understanding that the Mayor has adopted many of the ideas in the Oxford Street programme, particularly around the east that you've just touched on as well. And I just wondered, first of all, if you think that this proposal could or will achieve similar outcomes, and just your reflections on what they might be, perhaps to Adam. Sorry, Councillor Hugg.
Sorry, could you say in terms of the work, I think, as I said, the work that's been going on over the last couple of months, I think puts us in a much better place if the scheme is to be delivered in terms of responding to some of those concerns that we initially raised in September.
So I guess my question is, do you, in your view as the leader of the council, do you think that the proposal, and I might be wrong in this understanding, that the proposals that the Mayor has put forward have taken on board some of the work that you will have done over a period of time? I will come to you.
So we absolutely welcome that engagement, and we believe, again, a lot of things will, if the Mayor proceeds, will evolve over time, and we will make sure that as a local authority we're putting our issues and those issues front of mind in terms of where I think a lot of that as DNA has been taken on board, and the concerns that we've raised have been listened to. Obviously, there's a lot further to go in terms of delivery, and I'm sure Tim and I know Tim and others have obviously got a number of concerns, but as I said, particularly around recognising the security challenge, recognising some of the impact on transport, there has been greater understanding, and I think obviously that piece on the eastern side obviously is helpful in terms of enabling the pressures on the wider transport system to go. And I really appreciate the work that the Mayor is talking about doing in terms of freight consolidation with the council, with NWEC and others, around trying to help reduce the overall number of vehicle movements across the wider West End, which is absolutely crucial, not just for Oxford Street, but for the city as a whole in terms of taking some of those pressures off. So Our job is to be pragmatic, and if that's the direction of travel, to make it work in the best interests of local residents. And I think we're in a better place because of those discussions. And ultimately, for this to work for residents, for London as a whole, whatever happens has to be different parts of the public sector working effectively together. But our job as a local council is to bring those interests from local people and others into that mix, and make sure that they're listened to, and any problems that may arise are responded to.
Thank you. Tim, I saw that you wanted to come in.
Well, just to say, I think the process that the Mayor has now got is not pedestrianisation first and then the MDC. The only proposal you're going to be looking at is the creation of the MDC first. So the powers are taken, and then you get to finally get the answers on the practicalities some way down the line. So you've really got to work out whether that's a sensible approach, given the practical problems that have been raised for the last 10 years on pedestrianisation. I listened with interest what Richard said about his pedestrianisation schemes, but just let's get back to some facts, that what we're talking about is the removal of buses and taxis from Oxford Street. It doesn't have normal traffic on it during the day, but it has a lot of buses. There are 16 main bus routes down Oxford Street. And when you talk to older people, that is what they rely on, because they don't like taking the tube. They want to get a bus, and they want to put their shopping on the bus. So I think it's very different from other pedestrianisation schemes. I just want to say something about planning blight, because what happened in September, we now have a whole debate about what will happen to all of planning in the mayoral development area. And I think all of the property developers will wait till the end of that debate before they make any more investments. You want to know why? Because the planning rules might change. We might have a different planning policy for the mayoral development area than we do for the rest of Westminster. So in my view, I think there's been a tragic mistake in September, because we had a scheme that was ready to go, that everybody agreed with, and we're now going back to another massive uncertainty as to where we'll end up, and that's what's going to slow down investment. And finally, I just want to say something about this rent increase issue. So every property company knows that if you get pedestrianisation, your rents go up by 70%. That's the standard statistic. And that's all fine. But all I would invite you to do is add to your list of issues to investigate is increasing rent and increasing commercial property values obviously in the public interest on Oxford Street? Because it doesn't get examined enough. This issue of, oh, well, we'll just put the rent up, does that help or does it hinder? And I think you should be really focusing on that.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair.
Can I just ask, Councillor Hugg, what is it about Westminster's Oxford Street programme that is wrong?
So, obviously, we supported the programme that we worked on with NWEC, with residents for a number of years, and we thought that, from our perspective, best dealt with the different competing interests in there. Obviously, potentially from a London-wide or national level, there may be a different view about how you balance the different priorities. We understand that, but our job as a local authority is to balance things in those particular ways. I think, as I said, I wasn't sure if you, earlier, obviously there is a trade-off between sort of speed and the overall cost of what we would have done versus the sort of greater ambition that the Mayor is bringing to, from his perspective in terms of the pedestrianised areas that will be developed by an amended scheme. So I think, from our perspective, the difference is, retaining bus access, obviously, throughout the whole length of the street gives you some of the things particularly around accessibility and more support for traditional retail, whereas obviously more pedestrianised space leans into more of the general evolution to different forms of uses experience and F&B and stuff like that. So I can see there are different perspectives. We are clear, obviously we supported the scheme that we put forward, otherwise we would have put forward a different scheme. However, we also recognise that the Mayor's scheme, we will be able to reallocate funds. We have already reallocated the funds that the Council would have spent on our scheme into other things around Westminster. Obviously, the Mayor coming in means that the Council doesn't have to make that investment in Oxford Street itself. And there is obviously a trade-off in terms of the, as I said, there are different pressures that would be seen from a London perspective than ours. We are very clear that we supported our initial scheme. We welcome the fact through discussions with the GLA that some of the key features of that will hopefully form part of whatever comes next if the Mayor takes the decision to proceed, be that on the eastern half or in terms of some of the DNA behind this, because there's been an awful lot of work done by us, by NWEC and the residents in terms of working through some of the practical challenges. So that will give a platform to move forward more swiftly than if that work hadn't been done. So I think we hope that a lot of that work won't be wasted and will help inform what comes next. And we are confident in terms of some of the changes that have happened. So I think it's a difference of perspective, and I think, but obviously from where we sat, we supported our scheme. We welcome the fact that there's been productive discussions about some of the practicalities over the last few months, and have greater confidence that the challenges that could have been posed are in the more manageable space. But there's a lot of detailed work that will come over the months and years ahead. But as I said, we welcome the engagement the GLA's had over the last few months.
Your Oxford Street programme presumably was something that was adopted by the council as a whole, or was it just a cabinet decision?
I can come back to you. There are various different cabinet decisions and support, but my understanding is that our scheme had support from across the council, and obviously we've been doing a lot of work to build support with the communities and businesses.
And how many councillors are there on Westminster Council?
54.
54. On the new arrangements, you're only going to have 2 on the board of the MDC out of a board of 13. Do you think that's an improved accountability for your accountability for the Oxford Street scheme, or a decline?
So my understanding is that there will be a minimum of 3 Westminster nominated representatives on there. Obviously, there'll be at least one of which would be a councillor from the Westminster side, and obviously one from the Camden side. Obviously, it is a different setup to a council approach. Obviously, as a councillor, we thought our approach was going to deliver positive results. We recognise that the Mayor is wanting something different here. I think the key thing for us is making sure that if this proceeds, that the council is in a position to make sure that those local concerns are being adequately respected within the framework of an MDC and other partnership arrangements between the different local authorities to make this work. And I think it's got to be about that sort of process of working together in the public interest to find ways through particular problems. So yes, obviously, it's not a. It is a different setup. It's not one we would have chosen, and it's not one we think is wholly necessary to do this. But we understand where the Mayor is coming from about why he.
You wouldn't have chosen what the model the Mayor has.
Well, otherwise we would have chosen. Otherwise we would have chosen it ourselves. Obviously, there are a different set of state priorities that are clearly coming from, in terms of management of it, from this place rather than from our own end.
What do you think? I mean, do you get on with Camden Council? Very good. Visual demonstration. So what is it you guys can't achieve together that can be achieved by the imposition of an MDC?
So, look, as I said, we think to deliver it is not necessarily to have an MDC to deliver transformation of Oxford Street. However, there are clearly certain things that will potentially want to go on beyond the lifespan of a particular mayoral term in terms of contract arrangements and all sorts of things to deliver something that will be coming from a GLA side rather than from a local side. So I'd imagine it's that longevity, and there may be obviously ways of working that can help deal with any cross-border issues, although obviously we have a good collaborative
relationship. That's what I'm trying to get. You don't fall out over Oxford Street on anything, right? No? Mr. Lord.
You just have to point out Oxford Street isn't in Camden, is it?
No, not really.
So can I just say, obviously the Mayor's read the Localism Act.
Yes.
That's what he's taking the powers under. And one of the justifications for an MDC in general is some by-borough issue. But this is a manufactured by-borough issue because he's drawn an area that artificially includes Camden.
Mr. Olszewski.
I think...
Councillor Olszewski, sorry,
okay.
I beg your pardon.
I think there are benefits from having a mayoral development corporation, because we are talking by boroughs, and it's not artificial, because the impact of what might be done by anyone on Oxford Street doesn't stop at the Tottenham pub. You know, it does filter through to Camden. And although, you know, we have well-established working relations with Westminster Council at all sorts of levels and so on, it nevertheless can be beneficial to have, if you like, a kind of, for want of a better metaphor, a single mind overseeing it all. I think there are benefits from that, particularly as you know, we have ideas and we've been taking action to improve that adjoining space that's within Camden, and we can see the benefits that from our perspective of bringing them together to the extent that the Mayoral Development Corporation would have responsibility for, and there are still, I mean, we're still confident that we can make our input into that.
Doesn't it sound like you have to be made to get together? It sounds like you've got a good relationship already.
Well, it's not about necessarily being made to get together, because, you know, I'm not putting up the barricades on Tottenham Court Road. It's a proposal that's come along, and I thought, well, that seems quite, from our perspective, we think that's quite a good thing. Lots of questions that still do need to be answered, but we think it can be beneficial from our perspective, and we think that, you know, subject to ironing out all sorts of details and so on, it could be beneficial all round as well, because any improvements that can be made overall to how Oxford Street operates as a public and business space and so on benefits Camden as well, because many of the same people who will be visiting Oxford Street, shopping there, using whatever, you know, events and so on, they will also be going into the Camden side of things as well. You know, and we've been doing a lot of work for many years to sort of improve that space, which has already been mentioned, the outer reach around Centre Point, and we've got plans to have what we call the Holborn livable neighbourhood around, extending into Bloomsbury and British Museum, etc. We're doing work in Fitzrovia and so on. We think that they could benefit from a broader approach, and a Mayoral Development Corporation can make that happen.
Thank you. Members, it's largely my fault, but we've got half an hour left on this session. I'll just hand over back to Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you. I forgot to ask this particular question, which is important. To what extent do you think crime and antisocial behaviour is a problem on Oxford Street and the surrounding areas? And do you think pedestrianisation might impact crime levels?
So I think obviously there are issues around shoplifting and phone theft that are a challenge for Oxford Street at the moment. I think obviously we have partnership working with NWEC and with the Met on trying to tackle those issues, and I think we have obviously had some concerns around the potential for pedestrianisation, making some of the issues around that more challenging in the absence of either a greater security presence to respond to that, just in terms of the different behaviours around acquisitive crime and potential for public disorder, particularly late at night in an open public space. Now, again, obviously, a lot of the detail will be ironed out over the months and weeks ahead, but we do very much feel that the GLA is in listening mode on that, in terms of the need to respond to some of those challenges, whether that's with wardens or additional availability over time. And then the separate point around the HVM counter-terrorism stuff that needs to be put in place. Obviously, our scheme had spent a lot of time looking at how you would manage that in a place where you're retaining the traffic. Obviously, there are a different set of challenges posed by a fully pedestrianised space, but those are issues that we feel have been being taken on board by the GLA in terms of responding to that. There's a lot of detail to be ironed out, but there's an understanding that there are particular challenges that we created by pedestrianisation that will need to be responded to, and that will be an important, if the MDC is created, going back to the point about why an MDC might be helpful, it's a coordinated body that can help potentially recruit wardens or whatever. If you want to do, obviously NWEC could do things like that, we can, but it could be a way of generating revenue and then actually providing those people to do it. So that's one challenge, but we recognise there are some real practical challenges, but that's will be detailed working going forward to try and respond to them and address them. But we've had separate issues around the implications for different parts of the street, and obviously retaining that access on the eastern side helps us manage some of the egress from Soho issues that we were worried about in terms of potentially dealing with the potential changes in that area.
Thank you.
Assembly member. Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, Adam's right. Pedestrianisation or any sort of changes to the fundamental dynamic of a space like Oxford Street would throw up new challenges and so on. I mean, it doesn't create them as if somehow they don't already exist. They do in different ways, whether it's retail crime or crime and antisocial behaviour that's can be a feature of the environment around people forced into rough sleeping and so on, where there are many deep-seated causes that underlie those factors, and pedestrianisation potentially could help, but it's only one means among many that need to be deployed in many more fundamental ways to tackle poverty and grinding inequality, etc., which are way beyond the scope of what we're discussing, but nevertheless is action that needs to be taken at various government levels and so on. Camden has been putting extra resources into sort of support, community support officers and additional officers to help those sleeping rough, etc. I would be looking to see if potentially a mayoral development corporation, precisely because it's going across two boundaries, can kind of blur those boundaries for coordinated action and so on, where they perhaps might get in the way at the moment.
Thank you. Dee, from the perspective of your members, it'd be really great to hear.
For sure. So I would say crime and antisocial behaviour is a national challenge that we face, and in particular in retail destinations. We know shoplifting, violence against shop workers is a particular priority and an area of focus at the moment. We have 24-hour security in the area. We work very, very closely with Westminster City Council and Metropolitan Police. What I will say is the creation of an MDC which sole purpose is the regeneration and the growth and the support of Oxford Street provides an interesting opportunity on how we might use that to support in some of these challenges that we face. The devil will be in the detail, and I think we need to be making sure, and we are absolutely ready to work collaboratively with stakeholders in the area on what we might do to address that, and we're ready to do that as we have been in the past.
Can I just pick up on one thing that the Chair raised about whether Westminster and Camden get on? I attended the meetings on the Westminster Oxford Street scheme. TfL were there, NWEC were there, and if it had been helpful for Camden to be there, I'm sure they would have been invited. I can't remember, but we did have a very inclusive set of meetings on the previous scheme. On the issue of pedestrianisation and whether it causes crime, my understanding is it can go either way, so there's evidence in both directions. What we do know from our direct experience that Old Compton Street was pedestrianised in Soho in 2000, I believe, and 9 months after they did it, they had to dig it all up because of the crime increase that happened on Old Compton Street. I think Adam slightly understated the crime in the West End ward. So all of Oxford Street is in the West End ward, as in Soho, it's Mayfair, a bit of Marlow and Fitzrovia. There are 40,000 reported crimes a year in the West End ward, 2,000 robberies, 2,000 violent assaults, and 500 sexual assaults. And the West End ward has something like 75% of all the public realm crime in Westminster. So there are really serious crime problems, and I think the visitors are beginning to notice it, because in the Westminster After Dark consultation that Adam's recently run, the first thing people say when you ask them about their worries about what they're concerned about the West End is safety and security. So the crime thing is a really big issue, and the thing that we've raised, because we're worried about it, is this suggestion that there can be a massive increase in the nighttime economy on Oxford Street. Now, I think, yes, there might be, but in our experience in Soho, if you mismanage late night, alcohol-led activity, the crime rapidly goes out of control and the police do not have the resources to deal with it. So that has to be front of mind, because you could destroy all of this. You could really destroy Oxford Street if it becomes a centre for crime.
Thank you. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Just to quickly come back to Westminster, you made a comment about cost. How much have you spent on this? Because you had a plan, which clearly you were in favour of. You now seem to be ceding to the mayor, but your residents have paid significant amounts of money, I imagine, on your own plan. So how much have you spent?
So the council has spent, in terms of our own plans, so there's two phases. The previous administration spent around £34 million prior to the change of administration on some plans that got to. I didn't get beyond the original sort of Reba Stage Naught on that, plus the Marble Arch Mound and some temporary pedestrian some widening during the pandemic. In terms of what has been spent since 2022, since our administration took over, obviously we did a lot of work to get to grips with the inheritance that we'd been left. What has been spent on enabling works on terms of actual physical transport changes around the city is around £11 million. So that's there on.
Now, what's been spent in total?
So in terms of Wigmore, I'm just answering your question. So what we have spent is in two buckets. About £11 million on physical changes, primarily Wigmore and Mortimer Street two-way, and a number of other enabling changes that will have public benefit since there. And there is about £12 million on the design work to getting up to Reba Stage 2, and we're about to go into Reba Stage 3 for our proposals. Obviously, we are confident now, off the back of the conversations with the GLA, that work will inform the work that they do going forward, not least because obviously there's now a commitment that the GLA will provide the necessary resource to deliver a scheme in alignment with our scheme on the eastern half of Oxford Street. So in terms of the work on the design side, that will very clearly set up the blueprint for what goes on the eastern side of Oxford Street in the years ahead. So in terms of that, in terms of the previous stuff, I can't say. In terms of what we have now, certainly since we've come in, there's physical stuff that is in the ground. Wigmore and Mortimer Street is now moving much more effectively now and will benefit in future. And then in terms of the designs, that will both help inform the work that goes ahead if the MDC and the Mayor's plans go ahead, not least in terms of helping physically deliver a scheme in alignment with what we had agreed on the eastern side of Oxford Street. So
you've spent £23 million plus what the administration spent before. Maybe I should reflect, your residents have spent £23 million since you've been a council lead. Are you going to be reimbursed that money by the GLA?
Well,
or the Mayor or the MDC?
As I just explained to you, about half of that is physical stuff that has happened and is there and is benefiting residents now. About £12 million of that is...
I don't dispute it. I asked you what you spent, and you told me that's what you spent.
So I'm saying, obviously, what I'm saying is there is a commitment from the GLA that money will be made available to deliver our scheme, to make sure that a scheme in alignment with what we've done is delivered on the eastern side of Oxford Street. So that is not being wasted. That is informing and delivering.
I never used the word waste. I just asked what you said. So you have spent £23 million. Fine. The GLA, are they going to reimburse any of that money?
They are going to be providing it in kind in delivery of the scheme in alignment with ours on the eastern side of Oxford Street.
Right. Fine. That's all you need to say. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Small Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. And my question relates to something we've spoken about already, which is potential displacement of traffic. So to what extent do you believe that pedestrianisation could cause displacement to surrounding streets of traffic? And if the Mayor does proceed with pedestrianisation, what do you think could be done to best mitigate the impacts on the surrounding streets and the residents and businesses there? We'll start with Mr Lord and move across.
Well, we haven't had any traffic-free days on Oxford Street for ages, but we did do one on Regent Street in 2020, and it's in page 21 of the papers I sent round earlier. They closed Regent Street just for 2 days then. This is what it did to the pollution. So it spiked the pollution, because we woke up on that Saturday morning in Soho, and the streets were full of cars all slapping on. We had gridlock, proper gridlock, because if you block Great Marlborough Street and Beak Street, you can't get out of Soho. So all in this part of London, all of the roads are very connected. And a problem that goes one way, or if you restrict carriageways there, it all plays out throughout the area in terms of increased congestion. There's also, in the papers I sent you, 4 pages of tightly written notes from residents who responded to our survey asking what happened, because it was such a disaster when we closed Regent Street for 1 day. So the only evidence we've got is that it's all connected together, and it can cause really significant problems away from the street. So that's, you close Oxford Street, what does it do to the neighbouring areas? It will massively increase congestion, and it will slow the buses down. My understanding is we already have the most congested city in Europe, and we have the slowest buses in Europe. And this will only make it a lot worse. And those practical questions, as I say, you can put the questions to Will Norman again later, but we've been asking for 10 years how this will work.
Hi there. Yeah. As Tim has touched on, we're yet to see the traffic modelling, and I imagine that will come out later this year in terms of any actual scheme for pedestrianisation. What I will say is, when we've done traffic-free days in the past, they are 1 day. Perhaps communication could have been better, but we're looking at long-term solutions, not a 1-day event which can cause some additional traffic in local areas. So I think let's not get too caught up on an impact on 1 day. This is a longer-term thing when we're looking at longer-term solutions, and clearly traffic has changed since 2017, since even 2020, when the last traffic-free day was done on Regent Street. So I think we need to look at that once we've seen the study.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to recognise the point that Dee made, is that we're talking about potentially a long-term change, not a one-day event. Obviously, from a Camden perspective, which is again one of the benefits of it being brought under a single umbrella, under a mayoral development corporation, is to kind of assess things in the round and how they impact both developments in one borough, impact those in another. We'd obviously like to be involved in modelling what the potential impacts on whatever details that emerge would be on our side of the fence, and not just within the mapped area, but more widely as well. And I think one feature that's emerged so far of pedestrianisation and other projects that seek to curtail traffic volumes and so on, is that you can, over the short term, have displacement, but in the long term, it begins to even out, because people either find alternative routes away from a particular area, and it also has the potential to weed out unnecessary journeys as well. So I think I'm optimistic about the benefits, rather than thinking that, well, because of that, nothing must change and traffic must just flow and flow and flow. I think we have to, this is a progressive thing, and we have to be moving away from seeing the only way for cities to function is for unfettered use of cars and other vehicles and so on. We have to find other ways to do things.
So, from our perspective, obviously, we will, if this goes ahead, we'll be working closely with TfL and any new MDC around trying to manage the traffic impact. I think compared to where things were 10 years ago, the overall number of buses in the area have been reduced. And obviously there has been the change to Wigmore and Mortimer Street, which is obviously delivering two-way, which makes the transport issues, particularly to the west of the circus on the northern route, more manageable. And I think from our perspective, you know, if the Mayor's obviously looking at primarily the issue with this area between Orchard Street and Oxford Circus in terms of the first phase of pedestrianisation, that section is the most manageable in terms of taking the buses up Orchard Street, along Wigmore and Mortimer, and then back down either Regent or Great Portland, probably Great Portland. In terms of that's more manageable. There will be stuff in terms of displacement that really does need to be addressed, and I think we'll be working with local communities around that. I think, obviously, there are particular challenges on the section around if you're not able to go up Orchard Street in terms of the Marble Arch end, about how you get the buses into that traffic system. And again, we've raised those with GLN. I think there's been recognition about some of those challenges. And as I said, obviously on the eastern side, the Mortimer Street just gets narrower and narrower and narrower the further towards Richard's end of the world you get, which was always the biggest one of the biggest concerns around a potential pedestrianisation from that side is how would you get the buses through there? Because it's not primarily about private cars; it's about buses and taxis, and it's about that. And then there will be, the fact that the buses will be able to continue on the eastern side of Oxford Street makes that takes some of that pressure off and makes the system more manageable. But this has to be an impetus more broadly to deliver some of the changes to behaviour that Richard was alluding to, and we talked about it. And from my perspective, that is consolidating the number of freight journeys that are servicing the visitor and business economy in the heart of town. Wouldn't just benefit the immediate area around Oxford Street, across the wider West End, because the number of things that clog up those side roads, it is service traffic and it's Ubers and stuff like that. So it is how do you find different ways of managing that traffic more effectively, and I think freight consolidation is there, and then obviously waste consolidation again is something else that we want to look at in terms of overall vehicle movements. But in terms of the sort of pressure points, the further east you go, the more challenging it gets in terms of bus diversion. But there are obviously practical challenges that we'll need to work through with any future GLA scheme. But as I said, the section from Orchards, because of the changes that have been done on Wigmore and Mortimer, it makes the Orchard Street to the Circus section more manageable in terms of traffic displacement. But there's real issues around making sure that there isn't just whenever you make a change in the system, stuff spurts into different places, and it's how you work with the residents, particularly in Marylebone, around some of those, and Mayfair around some of those challenges.
Thank you, Councillor. You mentioned freight. Would that be something, Dee, that you'd be willing to kind of work with the council on? And more broadly on freight vehicles, what have the discussions been with the businesses who potentially might be impacted by any pedestrianisation on freight access?
Yeah, absolutely. Councillor Hugg and I have touched on this in the past. It's something we would want to be doing anyway, irrespective of any changes to pedestrianisation or not, because we recognise the fact that there are far too many vehicles coming into central London. So freight consolidation, waste consolidation are all things that we're looking at with our businesses currently. Yep.
Thank you. Just, yep.
Say something quickly about the traffic, because I feel I owe you, because I've lived there for 30 years. No one during the day in Soho is going for a bit of a spin in a discretionary fashion. The traffic we have is construction, service, maintenance, emergency and public transport. If you remove carriageways, you'll just get the same amount of traffic, more congested, because it's not like driving around other parts of London. It's very much service and maintenance traffic, and we see this all the time. It's different from other sorts of traffic, and that's all backed up by the traffic surveys that the council have done. And you know, that's why we really worry about this, because we can't see the traffic just suddenly disappearing, as has been suggested.
Chair, just my final question to Councillor Hugg. You've spoken about the importance of step-free access in a lot of the tube stations surrounding Oxford Street. Obviously, that's important in terms of different types of journeys that has been mentioned other than via motorised vehicle. Are those points you continue to make to stress the importance of step-free access in those tube stations in your discussions with TfL?
Absolutely. In terms of accessibility for the wider West End, delivering step-free access to the tube would be potentially transformational, and there's all sorts of things you could do around Oxford Circus were the money available for that. And we will obviously make the case. We recognise the overall demands on public sector capital on those sorts of things, but we will continue to make the case for that. But it is making sure that as we move forward, accessibility is fully factored in, and that's obviously, as has been alluded to earlier, a lot of older people use the bus, and it's making sure that you still have bus and taxi access as close to the street for people who are with those mobility challenges, and that any future MDC will look at how do you address the mobility challenges along whatever bits are pedestrianised. And I think those are issues where we will have active conversations, because we recognise for Oxford Street to thrive, it needs to, people who currently use it at the moment still need to be able to use it, and step-free access would be an important part of that, but we recognise the broader fiscal situation on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're at the point of the meeting where we realise we should have allocated another hour. But thank you for everyone for their indulgence. I'm going to have two more people to speak, I'm afraid, because otherwise we will run out of time. First, Assembly Member Russell, and then Assembly Member Wilson, please.
Yes, just circling back on the freight issue, I've been looking at this map of the MDC area, and I know in Cavendish Square, for instance, there's a massive underground car park. People used to drive there to go to John Lewis, and now they tend to go, since the congestion charge came in, they tend to go by public transport. Are you thinking about using underground car parks for freight consolidation and to enable kind of journeys, to the local journeys, to be made either by sort of small electric vans or by e-cargo bikes? Adam.
I can speak more broadly that certainly there is a desire to look at underground car parks across the city as part of that solution, and other underused public spaces. The specific case of Cavendish Square, obviously there are commercial discussions that I'm not going to get into around that particular site. However, in principle, we are looking across the city. The office car parks and all sorts of things are not used in the way that they used to be, and I think there are opportunities to creatively access that space. One of the challenges that we've had at the moment is trying to map. There's a real lack of planning data about how you map the number of unused office car parks across the West End, but that is certainly something that we're looking at. And I think there is a real appetite from my council, from NWEC, from other business districts across the city to try and help us on that journey. And that's where working with the GLA can be really helpful, because that part of that pan-London distribution networks and stuff like that, and try and join some of that up. But that could be game-changing in terms of reducing the overall number of traffic flows which enables you to do more interesting things without having to make some really painful trade-offs. So.
Yep. Thank you. I'm very aware of the time pressure that we're all under. In terms of buses, we've already discussed that, but I just wondered, Adam, as you've been working on your schemes up until now, is there anything you want to add about the challenges of introducing new bus interchange facilities around Marble Arch or Tottenham Court Road? If there isn't, don't worry, because it'll get picked up later.
Obviously, it wasn't something we were looking at for our scheme because the bus routes wouldn't have been directly affected. Obviously, one of the things, as I alluded to earlier, will be particularly from my perspective at the Marble Arch end, how buses enter that network and how people will change. But at the moment, I would imagine it will be route diversion. It's basically how you get the existing bus routes that are already underway, going along different routes into the Wigmore and Mortimer system. Again, that's detailed work to be fleshed out with any future MDC or whatever.
Of course. And then, have there been any discussions either with the GLA or with TfL about establishing alternative routes for people to cycle east-west if cycling is prohibited through Oxford Street?
So work is already underway on slightly further north in terms of east-west access along George Street, delivering on the current cycle networks and bringing them up to the best standards that we possible in terms of cycling access further north. There is a further question that will be had with GLA about what else is needed in that transport system. Obviously, there are, given that Wigmore and Mortimer will be the main diversion route for buses, obviously there are particular challenges there. But I think the GLA seem alive to those concerns, and I think will look to work constructively with us to manage those changes if this process goes ahead, because if you're not having cyclists on Oxford Street, they do need to go somewhere. Our George Street work will help with that, but we are open to further discussions around.
Okay, and presumably also secure cycle parking for people accessing Oxford Street by bicycle.
Yes, our scheme had secure bicycle parking on the side streets as part of that to encourage the sort of activation and cycle access into those side streets. Obviously, again, that information will be shared at the appropriate point with the GLA about how that can most effectively work within whatever they're going to come up with further forward. But absolutely, we recognise that accessing this by just as we need to maintain access to this new setup for people with disabilities, it's also making sure that people want to come there by bicycle can do safely and effectively, and that's obviously we're making that work on George Street already as part of work across Westminster to try and improve cycling access.
Yep. And we also need to be aware that some older and some disabled people use bicycles as mobility aids, so they also need to be able to actually get to the shops.
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Wilson, if you could ask a question in the quickest possible way, and if guests could respond in the most economic way. Thank you.
I'll do my best, Chair. Although, actually, firstly, so going against that, sorry, Chair, just want to thank Tim for the 3 points that you raised very early on and the sort of succinct way in which you did, and asking those as the kind of long-running questions about this whole debate that I think we still haven't answered from the wider discussion we've had. But, where does the traffic go? How do we improve accessibility for older and vulnerable and mobility impaired people, and business access? So I'm not going to ask for comments on that because of time, but I just thought it was worth acknowledging that those are questions that hopefully we'll be able to push further for in the second session. But my first question is around the kind of geographic boundaries of the proposed MDC, and wondering whether you think that those kind of make sense as an area to be encompassed within that. Are they too big? Are they too small? Tim, I think you alluded to the fact you think part of it is artificial as a way of bringing Camden in to create that kind of making it a by-borough issue when it doesn't necessarily need to be. I don't know what the other panellists think, but as Chair said, very quickly if we can. Thanks.
To be honest, I haven't been able to find in the mayoral consultation documents out there a detailed explanation as to why he's selected the area he has, and it may be that I've just missed it, but certainly Yoram from Fitzrovia has just said this is incomprehensible that you'd include huge chunks of Fitzrovia in this planning thing, and they're all really worried because for years they've commented on planning applications and they've had a planning policy that they understand, and they've known that the councillors who decide those planning decisions are people they've voted for, all of which is suddenly going to be taken away from them. So there's really, I don't know, it just seems an arbitrary thing. Whether it's because he feels he's more capable of negotiating deals with property developers than Westminster or Camden is, I don't know. All I would do is I would question that. When we've experienced, we look at Westminster doing planning a lot, and they're very effective at doing these deals on SIL, etc., etc. It's entirely unclear to us why the mayor would be better at that, and he'll have less local information and he'll have less historic information.
Perhaps Councillor Hugg next, please.
In terms of the boundary, obviously there's been a number of discussions between Westminster and GLA about potential boundaries, obviously with different maps that were going around earlier on. From our perspective, as we've set out, if an MDC is to be created for the purposes of delivering transformation on Oxford Street, it needs to be tightly bound to Oxford Street itself, and I think we've come a long way in terms of ensuring that that's the case with the current boundary as it's proposed. We think that given if an MDC is to be created, it makes sense that it is limited rather than to the purpose at hand, and we would obviously have firmly oppose any widening of the MDA area within Westminster, and I think we've made those views clear, and I think there's been understanding on both parties in terms of the lines as they're currently being drawn to reflect that.
We are content with the boundaries, and I suppose just a point to make is that all boundaries are human constructs, which may or may not be rational or possibly arbitrary or not. Just need to look at the boundaries of the states of the United States and ask how natural they are. But in terms of what's been drawn for this, Camden's content.
Sorry, just very quickly to add, I think the key thing is whatever happens, it's about how the different authorities work well together, and I think, yeah, it's in order to iron out those particular challenges irrespective of where the particular boundary is.
Do you have any comment on that? Sorry.
Councillor Hugg stole my thunder there. I think in terms of the survey that we've done with local businesses in the area, the majority are supportive of the boundary, but absolutely it will be down to how the MDC, Westminster City Council and Camden Council work together, so that if you are a developer in the area and you've got 1 foot within the MDA and 1 foot out of it, what does that look like and how does this work? So I think there's a lot of detail to work through over the next few months, but we're confident that we can work in collaboration.
That leads quite neatly into my second question then, which is about the issue of planning powers and having potentially a different set of planning policies applying in a very narrow area compared to the rest of the borough or city. And I wonder, given that the nature of the area, it's already heavily built up, there's limited scope for large-scale physical change and redevelopment. It's more about the kind of usage and the perhaps repurposing of existing sites and land rather than generating whole-scale new development, which is different from the other two MDCs that we already have, where there's very much a drive towards generating large numbers of new homes and new business premises and starting from scratch almost. Is it really necessary for this to have planning powers, given that there's only that limited way that it can do that? And it is the uncertainty and the blight that, Tim, you talked of earlier, and Dee, what you said about the kind of uncertainty by having potentially 1 foot in 2 camps. Is it really worth it? And the outcomes that any positive outcomes that can be generated from it, is it really worth having that level of uncertainty and blight, or is this just kind of empire building for the sake of it?
I think the sadness is the most likely outcome of this MDC process that we've now got is years of delay and frustration. So I know it's a tall ask, but I'm actually saying you shouldn't approve the MDC. We'll go back to the Westminster scheme. It was approved. It had been in planning for 2 years. Everyone knew it's been drawn, in detail, and is ready to go. I know Adam probably isn't allowed to say that, but it would just save so much time, so much pain, and it would deliver for Oxford Street.
One final sort of observation then, and I understand, and I guess it's really a lot based on what you've sort of talked about, Dee, kind of changing nature of the experience that people have when they go to somewhere like Oxford Street. And I get that. I mean, I love Oxford Street. I love spending time in HMV. I can just lose like 3 hours there quite happily. I also like the kind of nightlife, and I had a very enjoyable evening at the 100 Club on Saturday night. But the kind of general, if we're accepting a sort of general shift from retail to more kind of leisure kind of experience and so on, how badly do you think that might be affected by national policy, and particularly the national insurance hike and those industries, the hospitality sector in particular, the sort of victims of that? Is that going to, are we betting the house on something that actually isn't going to deliver because of national policy changes?
Well, firstly, we need more of you coming to Oxford Street and enjoying all that we have to offer. I think what we are seeing as of, is it today, yesterday, with national insurance and other increases, is an additional burden on businesses, particularly in the retail, leisure and hospitality sector, who some of which are already struggling. So the more that we can do to support them in terms of driving that footfall and getting customers through the door, we should absolutely do. We should.
Just very briefly, just to explain on the planning point, I think Westminster City Plan will apply for the foreseeable future until any future MDC creates its own city plan. So that would be the basis on which any thing with it. Obviously, Westminster is going through its own city plan revision process, and obviously, if an MDC is created, ours will flex and respond to that creation. Just to be clear, in terms of planning certainty, while the processes that you identified earlier will be different, the policy will initially remain Westminster's until any MDC comes up with its own policy arrangements.
I'm going to move on to the next question, if you don't mind, because it's a very final one. It's a very small question to one guest, Assembly Member Bakari.
Very quickly, on your very first point about experience of Oxford Street, how would that be impacted by the fact that there will be buses that are iconic and taxis that are iconic that no longer will be on those on Oxford Street, but maybe replaced by things like buggies? Is that going to change the experience, or is that still a positive in your opinion?
I mean, London buses are iconic, right? But they don't necessarily have to be on Oxford Street. People that come to Oxford Street don't stay on Oxford Street. In our experience, they go to Regent Street, they go to parts of Bond Street and Mayfair. So I think it's the experience as a whole. Replacing by buggies, I couldn't comment on, actually.
And we do have... I apologise for rushing you all forward. There is a question that we do need to ask in public forum. Assembly Member Russell.
Just very briefly, and this is one for Adam, would you support Oxford Street becoming part of the Transport for London road network?
So our approach has been to be as pragmatic as possible. Ultimately, we had a scheme that we were going to deliver ourselves. If an MDC is created, we will not be looking to stand in the way in terms of the delivery on the basis, provided that the safeguards and reassurances that we've been given are met. So that will be an appropriate discussion at that time. But we've set out our views, we've set out our priorities. But there would need to be alignment between the MDA and the highways powers, and we accept that.
That's a yes. You would, if all those factors were met, then you would let Oxford Street go into the TRM.
On that basis, because I mean, the key thing is to make sure that the system is managed as effectively as possible, so there would need to be an alignment between the highways powers and the MDA.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm very embarrassed this meeting's gone over time for you, so apologies for that. I'm sure meetings at Camden and Westminster always stick to time and never go over, so I do apologise. Thank you so much. We may have more questions I couldn't ask, and perhaps if you could volunteer in writing, Ms Corsi, was the costs for businesses today under the current Oxford Street programme. What's been spent by businesses. That would be very useful to know. But that being said, thank you so much indeed. I really do welcome this. I should emphasise this committee doesn't have the power to overturn the mayor's proposal, but the full assembly does with 2/3 majority. But we'll revisit that another time. Just for now, we're going to take a short adjournment while we change the panels. Thank you so much for your time. I'd like to do is extend a very warm welcome to the Year 10 students from the Lee Academy, Halley, from Greenwich, who are here in the public gallery today. And that's all. Gosh, there's a lot of you, isn't there?
What year are they, Andrew?
Year 10.
No,
we can't do it.
No, it's just too short notice.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. So I'll start the meeting. Welcome back to today's Planning and Regeneration Committee. We now to continue our discussion on the Mayor's ongoing public consultation on Oxford Street, on putting in a mayoral development corporation in Oxford Street. I would like to welcome our guests for the second panel. We have Molly Strauss, Head of Oxford Street Transformation at the Greater London Authority, Dr. Will Norman, the Walking and Cycling Commissioner from the Greater London Authority, and David Rowe, who's the Director of Investment and Delivery Planning at the Transport for London. I've just done that while you were at the room. So the first question, if I can launch straight away to Dr. Norman, why is the new Mayoral Development Corporation required to take forward the transformation of Oxford Street?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the invitation to come to this committee. So I think, as everybody's well aware, Oxford Street's a flagship destination in central London and is an area of critical national economic importance. People have been coming to the area to socialise, to shop for decades, and as I said, it is that important economic asset, both locally in terms of that economy, but also regionally in terms of London, and nationally. 120 million visitors a year contributes approximately, that area, 25 billion to London's economy. And it isn't just about retail, it is about the shops, the businesses, the people who live in the area. And that vibrancy is important not just in terms of the street itself, but it's a key, that vibrant West End is a key asset for London. It's one of the things that people come to London to live, to work, to study, and that attractive, that magnetic quality of that vibrant West End, irrespective of where people live, is key in terms of London's external investment coming into London, the creation of jobs, etc. And so it is part of how we compete on that global stage, and this is a competition. If you look at what's happening on Champs-Élysées, you look at every major other, Brussels, Madrid, Berlin, Barcelona, you can see the changes that have been happening on their main streets. And it's important that London looks after those assets, it nurtures those assets, that we continue to compete on that global stage. And sadly, the data is really clear that it is not failing to live up to its full potential, Oxford Street, at the moment, for a whole raft of reasons. We've seen a long-term fall in footfall, in terms of 40% down since 2008, 2009. There's an impact on vacancies, with 14% higher vacancies versus the national average, and I think in 2022. The rents lag compared to the surrounding areas. And while colleagues in Westminster, Camden and the business improvement districts have done an excellent job in terms of addressing some of the challenges, you can see that in the change of the proliferation of the sort of cheap candy stores, the so-called American candy stores. And with big names like IKEA and others coming into the store, both the Mayor and the government recognise that for Oxford Street and the surrounding area really to deliver its full potential, it needs a different approach, and it needs which is why the corporation has been planned. The idea behind that MDC is to have a single corporate body with all the necessary powers to focus on the improvements with the strategic leadership, coordination, to invest in that area, deliver its full potential, drive that economic growth that's needing both within London to keep it as one of the best cities in the world, but also thrive into that destination for visitors, jobs and investment. So that's why the Mayor's decided to take the decision to deliver the Mayoral Development Corporation.
Many of those arguments you've just articulated apply to a much larger footprint than Oxford Street. Is this going to be the last attempt that the Mayor has to take over a part of central London?
The idea behind this is that the change within Oxford Street acts as a catalyst for that wider area. We're already talking to landowners, businesses, about the changes that they want to deliver in the surrounding area. For example, Crown Estates have been working on a plan for Regent Street. How does this tie in? And so that focused approach on the Oxford Street district, its key asset, it is, you know, it's 120 million visitors a year. Virtually everybody who comes to London goes to Oxford Street. How do we make sure that that actually grows, continues to develop? But there are no other plans at the moment to expand or other MDCs within central London. This is very much focused on the unique characteristics of Oxford Street and the role that plays as an asset for the country and for the city.
And you said that the Westminster and Camden councils have done an excellent job. Well, it's obviously not excellent enough, is it?
I think that, well, that's exactly why we think that there needs to be a strategic authority that's focused directly on here to actually make sure that it delivers its full potential, bringing both areas together and brings in the powers and the work that the Camden and Westminster have done to elevate this further.
So what is it that, you know, Westminster Council has screwed up that you want to fix?
Well, one of the aspects, well, I don't think Westminster Council at the moment has screwed up anything, but I think it's actually how did the plans that they propose go further. Clearly, the Mayor's had long-term aspirations for the pedestrianisation of the street. We can talk a bit about the role that pedestrianisation
do you think that
can
Westminster
play.
Council hasn't had long-term aspirations for pedestrianisation of the street?
Well, the plans that were brought forward by Westminster City Council did not include pedestrianisation of the street, and that would be one of the major differences, I suppose.
And what alternative arrangements were considered?
Well, as you said, there have been other plans being proposed, either whether it's wider pavements, we've looked at pedestrianisation
I mean
in the past.
by the Mayor, what alternate arrangements rather than MDC were considered?
Well,
by
in
the
2017 there were plans to pedestrianise the street, which fell apart under the previous Westminster Council, and the Mayor's decided that none of the other alternatives have developed that potential, hence pursuing the approach of doing an MDC or proposing an MDC.
And how does Oxford Street meet the criteria of the Localism Act, which enables MDCs to be established for regeneration purposes? What will be regenerated?
So, well, the Localism Act talks about the objective of an MDC is to secure the regeneration of an area. Regeneration is the act of improving a place or improving a system, specifically making it more successful. And so the MDC, you know, the Localism Act, I think, gives, I can't remember the exact section, 201, gives the powers of the MDC to do anything it considers appropriate for that objective of improving the place, improving that system and making it more successful, which is exactly what we want to do with Oxford Street in terms of its maximising that economic and social potential, making sure that it is that globally renowned destination for both leisure, retail, and a destination, and making sure that that delivers the greatest benefits for businesses in the area, for residents, for London and the wider UK economy.
But is this just the first in a list of MDCs that the Mayor will want to propose around London?
I don't have a list myself. This is the one we're focused on. I'm not sure that there is a list of wider MDCs in here. I'm not familiar with a wider list of MDCs across London at this moment in terms of other high streets or other areas.
You're not saying that list doesn't exist?
Well, I can't deny I'm not aware of any list.
You're not aware?
No.
Right. Let's move on to Assembly Member Moema, please.
Thank you, and good morning to all of you. To you, Will, can you let us know how the Mayor decided the proposed boundaries of the MDC?
Yeah, so I think we heard a bit about that in the previous discussion. So the broad principle of the MDC is to obviously focus on that end from the entire length of Oxford Street from Marble Arch to Tottenham Court Road inclusively, spanning both boroughs of Camden and Westminster. This is not a land grab, as it's been said. An awful lot of people have written to make the area bigger, to make the area smaller. What we need to do is take a pragmatic approach to achieve those objectives, to drive this transformation and catalyse the change in the wider area, is to look at a boundary that is both manageable and sensible. We don't want a boundary that cuts through. One of the principles, you can't have boundaries cutting through existing buildings. You can't have a building that falls within one planning area and another. It needs to be bridged by navigable roads, and so if you follow the boundary of the MDC, those are the principles that came up with that, the boundary that is being proposed in the consultation at the moment. Now, I recognise, in talking to residents, to businesses, to other people in the wider community, people have different views on that boundary, and I would invite everybody to feed those views into the consultation, because this is, we've got a proposed approach with those principles, but obviously this is subject to that consultation, and we look forward to, we're getting responses already, and I expect many more to come.
Thank you. Assembly Member Bailey, you wanted to come in.
I just want to put on this idea of an MDC. Isn't it unusual to use an MDC just to deliver a pedestrian upgrade? Aren't these things usually used for housing, etc., big schemes?
Well, I suppose MDCs get used for different purposes. That in the Localism Act, what is down for regeneration, and there are different types of regeneration. So if you look at the LLDC, the Olympic Park, that's clearly using the Olympics to drive that regeneration of that area. The Old Oak Common development has got HS2 and the growth that's happening in that space. But there is, very clear reasons why this would be different to that. There isn't going to be suddenly there's not a brownfield site that needs to change in this space. It is about enhancing the existing opportunities there, but it isn't just limited to pedestrianisation. This is about creating a public space and how the buildings and how the how you create that public space, whether that includes trees, planting, advertising space for activations, events, to really bring people in, to make the street as attractive as the surrounding areas. To do that just with a pedestrianisation wouldn't deliver the full economic outcomes that we want to see within this. And that's why planning powers are required to bring in, planning enforcement, tree management, advertising, listing, all of that side of things. It goes beyond just a pedestrianisation scheme. This is actually making the whole area work more successfully than what we've got at the moment to drive that change.
So are you suggesting this MDC will do things that other MDC? Are you going to assemble land? Are you going to be building things? Because that's what an MDC and planning powers, would give you. Much of what you've talked about seems like something two councils who seem very prepared to work hand in hand could easily achieve. But you talk about an MDC in its broadest sense. So will you be assembling land? Will you be buying out shops? What will you be doing that needs an MDC that a council, together with its partner council, couldn't achieve?
I think those wider strategic powers that the MDC brings will actually drive that change holistically across the area that hasn't been done to date. But it will be down to the MDC and the powers that are conveyed on it through the consultation to ultimately decide what powers it will have. But we believe that the only way to allow the area to deliver its full potential is to not just take over the street, but actually to ensure that the buildings and the street evolve together as a new public space that will require planning, changes to some of those buildings and how they function within that area. Other aspects on the street side, which requires planning permission to deliver things, is a vital part of how we need to deliver the change and the emphasis that's needed.
Again, I think it's a challenge to understand why a council couldn't achieve all that. Chair, back to you.
Well, I was going to come back on that because those powers were already invested for most of this scheme on Westminster Council. Why are they so incompetent?
Nobody. I'm not sure who said they're incompetent.
Incompetent. But there must be. If you're coming in and you're trying to save Oxford Street from Westminster Council, there must be something they're doing wrong.
Not at all. This is, as I said on the outset on this, is that to deliver the full potential in this, having a corporate body that is solely focused on the uplift and change on this iconic street that is important in terms of that region, brings together the powers of both councils, focused entirely on this, works with them surrounding it, but clearly...
And why can't those councils do that themselves?
Up until now, that has not happened. Yeah, delivering the changes that we need on the street will come through from, will be part of the MDC to do things differently. There will be a local plan developed by the MDC if it's created.
So you don't think they're taking the action that's necessary to solve Oxford Street, and so you're going to take the power away from them, is that correct?
The councils have done a good job. We believe the MDC can go further.
They obviously haven't done a good job, Dr. Norman, have they? Because otherwise, why would you need an MDC?
Well, I go back to some of the challenges that I outlined in the response to your first question, in terms of the challenges around the footfall, in terms of the vacancies, in terms of the opportunities that are not being achieved in this area, and that's why the MDCs needed to take that forward.
So they didn't do their job, so you have to do their job for them. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think it's fair putting words into my mouth.
No, I'm just using your words, and it appears to me as though you don't think Westminster Council was doing its job properly, and therefore you have to take the job away from them. And I'm just trying to find out what it is they screwed up, what it is they did wrong. They must have done something wrong, otherwise you would not be spending all this time trying to put together an MDC, would you?
Historically, I would say that there has been a missed opportunity when the plans jointly to come together to pedestrianise Oxford Street fell flat. We don't believe that the plans that were being brought forward from Westminster in the last period went far enough to deliver the changes that were happening.
So that's what they did
wrong. And that's where we believe that an MDC can actually take that further forward, actually deliver the changes that the businesses, visitors and a raft of other people are wanting for their area, hence the delivery, hence the creation of the MDC, to focus on that strategic change that's needed.
Well, I'm sure that message is heard loud and clear in Westminster, that their councillors aren't doing the job. Assembly Member Russell, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just continuing on about the MDC and why it's necessary to become a planning authority for the area, and developing a little bit further on Assembly Member Lord Bailey's point about housing, just wanting to check in, is there any thought of developing any of the retail or office space into housing?
So there is some housing on Oxford Street. If you look above Primark at the moment, I think there is new housing in that space. I think I was looking at old Pathé footage of Oxford Street. One of the things that is very clear that Oxford Street has always been changing in terms of its use, in terms of how people are using it. You can see old pictures of music halls, cinemas, etc. You can see that there is, that our role is not to dictate how it should change, but how do we make those changes that are coming a success. In terms of delivering housing, I can't imagine it will suddenly become a huge amount of housing, but that has to be something an MDC would look at if it is created in the future. But you can see already, I think, about two-thirds of the square footage. Does that work? Sorry.
Apologies for that.
That's all right.
Has happened before.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay. So the two-thirds of the space already is office space. That seems to be becoming increasingly popular, but there are challenges in talking to businesses and occupiers in that space about how can you make the area more pleasant for people to spend time, to dwell, to make it more attractive so that growth continues. But in terms of huge amounts of housing, I'm not sure that's going to be entirely appropriate in that space because it has got a unique character. This is not about changing the unique character of that, it's enhancing the area to build it forward.
So, okay, so thank you for that. Then the other piece that has come up is about enhancing Oxford Street to help it be the very best it can be and to be a place that people want to spend time. And we heard about kind of pedestrianisation, kind of raising rents in the first part of this meeting. And I'm just wondering whether there is a plan to ensure that the economic benefits of any changes that come through the MDC are going to benefit all Londoners. So will there be low-cost space? Will having an MDC enable the mayor to ensure that there are low-cost, affordable spaces for creative endeavour? So for music, for arts, acting, theatre, but the more sort of informal, the kind of that development pipeline of people who are just leaving college and getting going. Is there a kind of social benefit that that is baked into the thinking around having an MDC?
So at the moment, Oxford Street is obviously premium retail space, and will continue to be that way. The showcase stores from British brands as well as all over the world, that is very much, I think, going to be seen as part of that future. But the part of the role of what we intend and what we're consulting on is actually the creation of new public spaces. And for me, as I said before, it's going to be as important as it's important to make sure that those public spaces are as attractive as the shops and the units and the services that are being provided at the moment. So with those new public spaces, there is the opportunity for activation, for cultural engagement, smaller flexibility in terms of events, activations, markets, etc. So I think that will bring a wider benefit to, for London, both from an experiential perspective, from a commercial perspective, but also from a cultural opportunities within that space. But I think, again, coming back to the economic benefits that this brings to London and the wider UK economy, ensuring that this is really delivering to its full potential brings benefits to everybody, not just in London, but also with the wider exchequer.
So are you also thinking about kind of food opportunity? I mean, because frankly, there's not many cafes and places kind of actually along Oxford Street where you can pause and dwell. It's all retail space. Yeah. Will the MDC be kind of bringing in a food element as well?
So I think that will be down for the MDC to decide, but I think certainly some of the feedback that we've been getting from people is actually the overall experience of the space is absolutely vital. These stores invest a huge amount of money in creating that experience for their customers, and those experiences can be positive within the stores, but coming out it isn't quite so positive, and where do you go afterwards, where's to eat, etc. So that has to be part of that wider thinking of both the MDC area and how it works with the areas, the lovely restaurants in Soho, Fitzrovia, and that area, and how do you make that connectivity and from the pedestrianised space to those wider areas.
And just, you mentioned the existing retailers. So is there anything else you want to add in terms of what they think about these proposals, or anything you've heard thus far with your communications with them thus far?
So I think collectively we've spoken to a lot of retailers, and it's not just the retailers, it's also the office space and the occupiers, the owners, etc. And they all tell me that retail is changing and Oxford Street needs to adapt and change with it. The stores, I think, have done a good effect. You can see from the thing, there are challenges with online shopping, out-of-town retail, the shopping malls, etc. But the fact that you've got, I mentioned the new IKEA store, that's coming in as a showcase. That will be, it'll include, I think they told me, 130 seating Swedish deli in there. But it isn't necessarily somewhere people will be buying stuff and taking their Billy bookshelves out. It will be that experience of IKEA and then purchasing online with home deliveries. The consistent feedback I've had, and having some experience of working for a company that has got space on Oxford Street, it is that customer experience is absolutely fundamental middle to this, and that's what's changing in other parts of the world, needs to change within London. Retailers invest a huge amount of money inside those stores to deliver that positive customer experience, to create that positive brand for people in there. But sadly, that is being let down as they come out of the store onto a street that is frankly clogged with traffic, provides risks in terms of collisions. We shouldn't forget that there are, I think, on average 57 collisions on Oxford Street a year. How do we, the crowded pavements are come back. So we need to create a space where there is more dwell time, where people are happy to spend more time. The retailers are calling for that, not just so that people spend more time in their stores, but in the wider area. We know that pedestrianisation drives up footfall. We know that, that creating this and having a positive space to eat, activations on the street, connecting with the calm, better connecting with the calm that is Hyde Park. You know, you've got this wonderful green oasis at the end of the street that is not, that the Severance, I can't remember how many crossings it takes to go across to there, but that is sort of disconnected from the retail. So that entire space is required, a change is required to that whole space, and retailers, as well as the occupiers of some of the offices and others, are calling out for that change.
Thank you, and thank you also for raising Vision Zero and that kind of road danger aspect to this, because I think I was looking up, and between May 2016 and May 24, there were 4 fatalities and 125 serious injuries on Oxford Street. So do you think that the Oxford Street pedestrianisation can seriously help to bring those kind of numbers down?
Yes, each and every one of those is a tragedy in its own right. But it is, you know, and I don't want, you can't reduce this to pennies and pounds and pennies, or whatever the phrase is. They are tragedies and they need to be avoided, but they also have a knock-on economic impact to that area. If people don't feel safe in an area, then they are unlikely to be spending time. And if you walk down Oxford Street today at any busy time, you will see people just stepping into the road to avoid other people walking down the pavement. If people have got mobility aids, etc., there isn't the space on those pavements. We need to make it a better space. That includes safety, include it from collisions and reducing road danger in the space, to ensure that the actual, you know, people want to come here, want to spend time, and don't fear getting being involved in a collision, which sadly is happening, as you observe, too often.
Yep, thank you. My final question is just, is there any scope for the Mayor to use the MDC powers to grant business rate relief to businesses that it would be desirable to have functioning along Oxford Street? So, for instance, you know, sort of creative businesses or things that would help with the experience side of things, but might not be able to pay the big business rates that perhaps the big retailers are able to afford.
So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Molly, but the consultation includes the proposal that the MDC would take on the ability to grant discretionary business rate relief for within the area. Clearly, no decisions have been taken on how or whether the MDC would use that function. That would be up to the board of the MDC, and it would just depend on what context. But I think having that power is a very important tool as the area evolves and develops. I think the other MDCs, is it Middlesbrough and Hartlepool, have the similar powers. But obviously, both in those cases, the MDC, I think, refunds the local authority for any loss of business rate in that space. You know, I think that, you know, I would imagine that would be the same case should an MDC be created here, but the local authorities, I think, would remain the charging authorities for those business rates. So I think it's a tool that would make sense to have. How and when it might be used, I think, is down for any future MDC board and to deliver the functions that and the objectives it's got set out.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Can I ask, is TfL planning for Oxford Street to become part of the TfL road network?
I'm going to hand that one to David.
Of course.
So it does very much depend on the outcome of the consultation that's taking place at the moment, which obviously includes the key question around the principle of pedestrianisation. But if TfL were to move forward on behalf of the Mayor in terms of the pedestrianisation scheme, then that's a means to do it. It also provides the Mayor then with the ability to how to activate and how best to use that space. So what do they want to do in terms of events, in terms of bringing more people into the area? So there's the changes themselves to pedestrianise as well as the ongoing management, which would be key. But at the moment, as I say, it depends on the outcome of the consultation that's happening at this point.
It doesn't really, though, does it? I mean, you could just make the street a TfL road. You don't have to be part of an MDC to make a TfL road.
So the Mayor does have the powers to change roads to be part of the TLRN. That's correct, in agreement with the relevant local authority. And we have done that in the past where we've introduced changes, or the borough's introduced changes, which have meant that there's been necessary changes to the individual networks. If there isn't agreement between the relevant local authority and the Mayor, then the matter gets referred to the Secretary of State. But there is the powers, you're correct.
And so we heard earlier from the leader of Westminster Council that he's not entirely unsympathetic to the idea of Oxford Street becoming a TfL road. Why do you need an MDC if you could just make it a TfL road?
Well, I'll refer to Will to come in on this, but it clearly relates to the wider set of changes that are anticipated here in terms of how you can best activate, bring people into the space for them to want to spend longer and come more frequently in terms of really driving that regeneration that the street has the potential for.
Dr. Norman?
I'd say the same thing, that if it was just a matter of pedestrianising a street, then that wouldn't be the case. But to actually deliver that public space that actually delivers the change and the growth and that world-class experience, then that requires more than just a highway authority for this. It will require planning and how then the buildings merge into the street. People have talked about the need for more food or whatever the changes that are needed to make that really happen require planning, not just highway authorities. Highway authority.
That's not something you do on other parts of the TfL network? You don't think about the general environment of those TfL roads?
Of course, but they don't have. TfL doesn't have planning powers over its highways because they're two separate. But you have
I'm sure you have a very, very good relationship with local authorities and work with them to deliver the best possible environment for TfL roads. Is that correct?
We work very closely with local authorities to make sure we have the best quality on TfL roads.
So it makes one wonder why you need an MDC.
But we have no powers over the buildings and the use and the other changes that need to happen along this road to create a new public space, rather than just to create a road, rather than just it being a management of the highway.
But currently the local authorities have those powers. Why are they inadequate?
I think I've answered that question.
Okay. We'll move on to the next questioner, which is Assembly Member Desai, please.
Sorry. Good afternoon, panel. My first set of questions is to you, David. How much is Transport for London planning to spend on delivering the first phase of pedestrianisation from Oxford Circus to Orchard Street? And how will this be funded?
So we have not drawn up any detailed plans for how the pedestrianisation would be implemented. We are obviously waiting on the results of the current consultation on the principle of pedestrianisation. That would then give us the green light in terms of developing up options for how you could pedestrianise the street, recognising that you'd need to consider that on a sort of section-by-section basis. So you've referred to the section from Regent Street up to Selfridges as an example, and you also need to consider north-south movements as part of that, awaiting loading, particular users' requirements. So all of that will need to be worked through. So I can't give you a cost estimate for that because it will depend on the options and which one we then potentially take forward for more detailed consultation, which would be a subsequent step subject to the outcome of the current consultation.
So in that case, my second question, I'm not sure if you can answer that, but I'll still put it to you. what are the estimated costs of delivering pedestrianisation along the whole length of Oxford Street and other public realm enforcements? So it will be the same answer again.
It is. We don't have a cost for that. It's not something that we've worked out.
I mean, I don't sit on this committee, but I'm subbing for someone. When does the consultation finish?
The 2nd of May.
2nd of May, not long to go. And then after that, depending on it, you'll look out the figures and this committee will be informed. Okay. My second set of questions then is to you, Will. What sources of income will the Mayoral Development Corporation have other than GLA funding?
Oh, sorry. The MDC will have a variety of different income sources that we're looking at. One is, as I mentioned, there'll be revenue from advertising, from events. You know, I mentioned you've got a lot of visitors coming to Oxford Street. We want to increase the number of visitors and increase their dwell time, which will increase the value of some of the advertising opportunities, as well as some of the event space and activations that can happen along there that we've seen in New York and in other cities have commercial value. There will be private sector and developer contributions to help cover the costs of this, as well as we're exploring philanthropic funding to help contribute to the project as well. But there will be as well, yeah.
So my next question, I don't know if it's the same answer that David gave me, but what are the estimates for MDC income, for example, in the first year of operation? Have you given any thought to some sort of
so if I'm completely honest, the size and the scope and the powers of the MDC, should it be created, that's out for consultation at the moment, will obviously have an impact on its income. So it will depend on the outcome of the consultation in terms of its full size and scope to understand quite what the revenue generations are and on what the costs are in terms of running that.
Right. So my final question is, how will the expenditure income from the Oxford Street MDC compared to existing MDCs, such as LLDC, the OPDC? Have you, again, I know it's early days, you're still waiting for the consultation, but has any sort of modelling been done now?
So I think, I can't remember off the top of my head, what's the, Molly, you might know the amount of money that's, I think it's about 30 million for LLDC and less than that for...
On average, the annual revenue expenditure of LLDC is 35 million. And
how much, sorry?
What was that?
So how much? What?
35 million pounds, and that's their average annual revenue expenditure. And OPDC's budget has been approximately 8 million pounds. So that gives you a sense of the types of budgets that MDCs have had.
But again, as I said, it will depend on the size of the boundary and the powers that it has.
So basically, watch this space and we wait.
Exactly.
Thank you, Chair.
So basically, we don't exactly know what the pedestrianisation scheme is, and we don't know how much it's going to cost, but you want us to give you the powers in order to carry out the scheme.
Well, we are asking the public to respond to our proposals that we're putting forward in terms of the principle of pedestrianisation, which is very clear in the consultation, and the powers to create the MDC.
But that's a red herring, isn't it? Ultimately, it's about handing over Oxford Street to the mayor. That's the principle. Everything else, as you're saying, is up for negotiation. You could change your mind, and you'd still have the MDC. And everything you've said to us, the MDC could change their mind over.
Well, the MDC would be set up with clear objectives, which are set out in the consultation, and that would be then created, and its job would be to deliver on those objectives. Well, I don't know if you want to come.
Yeah, I was just going to add that the process to set up the MDC would include laying out very clearly which powers the MDC would take, and we've put a proposal forward in the consultation. But as Will says, that's we're awaiting the feedback from all consultees on whether those powers would in fact be taken by the MDC, and then that would that would be very clearly set out in the document that then would be laid before Parliament to create the MDC.
So, yeah, but without knowing estimates of the costs, it's very difficult to agree a project without you being able to say how much it's going to cost. You realise that's hard.
So at the moment we're consulting on whether an MDC should be set up. yep, and what its objectives will be. Then when we have that, we can actually then bring together what that will do, what it will deliver, and the estimated costs of running it, depending on its scope, what its powers are, which will get then obviously been brought before the Assembly as well as laid before Parliament.
So if you set it up without any idea of how much it's going to cost, and then the Assembly, and then it comes in at a very high price, and London is saying it's too expensive. What are you going to do? Bearing in mind you've got ambitious aims for the street, but the detail we don't know about.
I was just going to add one point, which is that there's a period of time for the Assembly to consider the decision to move forward with the MDC post-consultation. So this isn't the Assembly's only opportunity to comment. No. And so I expect that we would have, I know that we would have cost estimates for that MDC worked up in detail at the point at which we brought, if we did bring a proposal to the Assembly, that would be provided at the time the Assembly was making the decision about whether to proceed.
Thank you. Would the MDC need a loan from the GLA, similar to the LLDC's 550 million?
So there will, as part of the financing, there's obviously contributions from the GLA. We envisage that some borrowing would come from the GLA and then will get repaid through those revenue sources that I outlined earlier.
Thank you. Assembly Member Wilson, you'd like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. You've actually slightly shot my fox there, because I was going to ask a similar set of questions, but it's fine. I think we're broadly in agreement with the line of questioning. But if I could just add to that, see, we're being asked to either give our blessing or not to a significant change in the structure of powers and potentially opening the chequebook to quite a significant cost, which all of us here and all Londoners will be responsible for kind of footing that bill. Is there... and yet we're being asked to do that without any detailed knowledge of either potential income or potential cost. But is there an overall level of cost at which it could be decreed or decided that actually this wasn't worth it, and it wasn't worth the upheaval and the knock-on effects that we've heard from the earlier session, particularly from the gentleman representing the residents, where this will have a knock-on effect on traffic going onto other areas. It will have a knock-on effect on accessibility for vulnerable people onto Oxford Street itself, and it will have an effect on existing businesses being able to service themselves. At what point does this overall cost outweigh any potential benefit, and at what point can we, as an Assembly, have an opportunity to comment on that and say, actually, this isn't something we should be going with?
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of this proposal, the consultation that's at the moment, it's setting out should an MDC be created. Yeah. In terms of the detailed proposals, there will then be the follow-up consultation in terms of, you mentioned the pedestrianisation. That would have to have a business case set up for it in terms of the benefits that would bring, as well as some of the disbenefits and the costs of that. That would then be subject to its own consultation, which we would be bringing forward in terms of the detailed designs. As we've set out before, we think that's probably going to be phased rather than doing the whole street in its entirety, but that would have to be costed, and that would be brought before the Assembly as well as consulted to the wider public.
So a lot more consultation, a lot more potential delay, and whereas we could have had an oven-ready scheme that the Council itself have been working on that could have been spades in the ground already. Yeah.
Assembly Member Desai.
Yes, 2 or 3 follow-up questions, if I may. Will, this will be to you. So in terms of the economic impacts of pedestrianisation for Oxford Street and London as a whole, and you talked about a business case being prepared after another round of consultation. I mean, have you given any thought, or can you give us your thoughts on how will you measure the impact side of things? What criteria will you be using?
Yeah. So I think if you look around the world, there's very strong evidence that pedestrianisation results in significant increases in both footfall and spend in retail areas. And as I said, this is not just creating a space so people can use the existing shops, but it's also creating a new space that would have commercial opportunities in its own right. The evidence that sits behind some of that, there's a variety of different surveys and work being done. I think NWET looked at sort of surveying visitors, and they all said that if there was a more space to relax, more space to sit, etc., people would come more often and deliver that. So the GLA Economic Analysis team have looked at a number of different scenarios in terms of the impact of pedestrianisation could have and the benefits of that using. In other schemes we've looked at, indicators such as MasterCard and card spending. We also can gauge money from the rates, and the NWEC gather economic data. The mid-range of those estimates indicate that you obviously don't want to take the extreme at either end. The mid-range indicates about £82 million, 80, sort of in that range, 80 to 90 million pounds of an increase in terms of GVA. And then they also looked at VAT increases, so that could bring about a 30 to 40 million pound increase in VAT contributions, and raise business rates from 10 to 20 million pounds in terms of that mid-range estimate in terms of the economic impact.
I think you answered my second question about looking at examples elsewhere. Is there any particular example that you can give us of lessons learned from pedestrianisation in another city?
Yeah, so and we have looked beyond London in this space. We've been talking very closely with New York and Mike Bloomberg, who was mayor at the time, bringing in the pedestrianisation on Times Square and Fifth Avenue. They've been working with us on this. We've also talked to Sydney, who built through a similar scheme on, I think it's called, is it George Street? Great George, St George Street, something George Street. I think it's George Street. And the changes have happened there. Also talking in terms of the changes and the benefits of in Barcelona. Been talking to colleagues in Paris about some of these changes. Yeah. And one of the key things is that with all of those, it's not just the changes that have happened along that street that have brought about those changes. It's also the way that has catalysed things in the wider area, and how it then brings in more investment and changes in that space. So you've seen that within, with other projects coming along. But as Caroline pointed out, the benefits here are not just the economic ones. We're also talking about the reducing the road danger, some of the environmental benefits that will be brought in this scheme as well.
My final question.
Oh, David, do you want to come in?
Sorry.
Mr. Rowe wants to come.
Will just picked up on the point I was going to make, that in any transport scheme that we implement, we always undertake a business case to understand the full costs and the benefits. So when I say full costs, that's the capital cost of implementing it, but also considerations around any journey time changes as well as other matters. And then what are the benefits, and not just the economic benefits, but the safety benefits, air quality and other considerations. So this scheme would be no different. If we were asked to work up more detailed options, that would be part of the work that we do subsequently.
My final question, Will, is how will you ensure that you are taking local residents and businesses with you in these plans? I think you know that we had this, well, I think they still here, the society chair. How will you ensure local participation, genuine local participation?
So we met with Tim and some of his colleagues in some of the wider residential areas. We'll continue to do that, and committed to share information as we go through this process. And obviously we're talking to local businesses, both within the area and surrounding, but also landowners and other people in this space. And clearly, as I mentioned a couple of times now, Oxford Street is a benefit both for regionally, and so we are consulting with wider Londoners, not just people who live in the area, because this is it's an asset and a destination for many more people than just those people who live around the space.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Just very quickly, in your answer to Assembly Member Desai, you said developer payments. So you'll be the MDC will be taking the SIL revenue, will it?
Yes, so the powers of bringing SIL and Section 106 would be coming in, but obviously in keeping with some of the arrangements that have been made with Westminster Council and Camden Council. Some of those payments with their SIL get spent on schemes elsewhere in the borough. We'd be keen to continue to ensure that that the area contributes to some of the areas outside of the MDC. So that's something we'll work through with those councils.
Yeah, we heard about that during the development of the Olympic MDC. It didn't really happen much.
Pardon?
It didn't happen much.
Well, we can learn from that, can't we?
We'll now move on to the next question, which is from Assembly Member Moema.
Chair, Assembly Member Desai asked my question because I thought I would have more.
It's already been asked.
The question's already been asked.
You've already done it. Oh, I'm so sorry. Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. One of the current issues with Oxford Street that we heard earlier is the crime issues. So what discussions have you had with the Metropolitan Police about crime and antisocial behaviour on Oxford Street and kind of in the broader West End?
I'm happy to jump in and say that those conversations have already begun with the Met Police. I've had one myself, and there's also been a conversation with the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime around designing out crime and any future pedestrianisation approach. So those conversations are well underway, and absolutely the ambition would be to work together on those issues. And I think there's also a recognition that even beyond working with the Met Police, there may be actions that the MDC could take to increase the feeling of safety in the road. I think there's been, of course it's too soon to say, and this is all subject to consultation, but we could have, folks invest ambassadors or other street wardens walking around the area to try to create a sense of safety and security that we don't yet have.
Chair, do you mind if I... Chair, do you mind if I come in as well on that? I'm going to anyway. So I absolutely, Molly and the team have been talking to the Met. The Deputy Mayor for Policing is regularly talking to the Met, as you would expect. And both the police, but also local residents and local businesses have all flagged some of the challenges on antisocial behaviour, mobile phone thefts in the area, retail crime and the rise of shoplifting. Sadly, these are things that are happening across the whole of the UK. And I'm very pleased that the recently published Mayor's Crime and Policing plan sets out both mobile phone robberies and retail crime as priority areas for the Met. And I envisage the MDC working very closely with the police to ensure that we can actually tackle some of these problems on what is, we talked about the problems of road danger in terms of reducing the visitor and people's experience of the area. Ditto crime and antisocial behaviour. That takes away from that positive experience that we really want to be delivering in that space. So clearly, how we tackle that will be fundamental to the deliveries of the entire project.
And if the pedestrianisation route is gone down, do you think we're likely to see an increased police presence on Oxford Street as a result? Because obviously what we don't want is a situation where a significant amount of money has been spent, but we see a rise in crime following pedestrianisation.
I can't commit to police numbers. I'm not the Commissioner of the Police, and we know the pressures the Met are under. But what I can commit to is that any NDC moving forward would have a key role in coordinating the policing, CCTV in the area, the existing security arrangements on shops. You mentioned the wardens in that area, not just along the street, but in that wider area as well. So absolutely, it will be play a really important role in improving the safety and reducing crime in the area. David.
I can just add to what Will said. One of the key considerations, obviously, if you are considering pedestrianisation, is around hostile vehicle mitigation, which would be a major measure for us in terms of how we can effectively control those pedestrian spaces to ensure that they remain safe for users. And that might be sort of 24/7, or it might be controlled hours, depending on loading and other considerations. So all of that would need to be worked through.
Thank you all for those responses. Just to move on to another issue now, which is we discussed earlier, which is congestion and pollution potentially on other streets, on diverted routes with traffic not going down Oxford Street. What consideration has TfL given to that possibility? And what are the plans for the buses that are currently in use on Oxford Street if pedestrianisation is pursued?
So two things to note on that. If I could start with the buses point. When we last developed the scheme back in 2016-17 for pedestrianisation, at that time there were 130 buses an hour on the busiest section, so the section on the west between sort of Selfridges and through to Regent Street. We now see 35 buses an hour on that same section. So we have seen significant changes in terms of the levels of bus use and the levels of bus provision that consequently TfL make. One of the largest steps of that was the Elizabeth line, and obviously the opportunities that opened up, which enabled us to reduce the number of services that were required to meet user need. And we continue to keep those under review. So when, and if we are asked to look in detail at the proposals, one of the considerations would be what would we need to do in terms of potential route changes as well as any diversions. And you heard from Councillor Hugg earlier where he talked about Wigmore Street as one of the streets which potentially could be used for that. So they're key considerations. The other point I was going to make was there have been wider changes in terms of both the sort of traffic patterns in the area, but also the makeup of the vehicles. So we've obviously had London-wide ULEZ that's come in, so we've seen changes in terms of air quality and other considerations. And we've just gone about with Westminster a programme of gathering information to update our traffic models, so all of the information on sort of traffic counts and other considerations, to ensure that we have that latest information should we move forward with the next stage of the scheme.
Assembly, could I add one thing as well? Obviously, TfL is also undergoing the transformation of the bus fleet to make them electric and zero emission, and this would be a priority space for that, obviously moving that. So that's something that is happening across the bus fleet in London, and it would be key that actually any movement of those buses would help improve, and introducing of electric buses in those spaces would help improve air quality in that wider area. There's also an issue, I think it got raised in the previous session, around the high levels of service vehicles and freight and delivery pieces. And you can see some of the freight consolidation schemes that have happened elsewhere in London and the impacts that that brings in terms of reducing the overall numbers of vehicles in the area. So I think in Bond Street, where the bid worked very closely with TfL and the council to reduce that reduced the number of waste deliveries from, I think, about 149 a day to 9, with associated benefits on carbon emissions and NO2. So I think, again, the MDC can play a critical role in actually delivering those changes, both for Oxford Street, but also those surrounding areas, both the north and south.
Thank you all very much. Back to you, Chair.
Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Just to focus on this challenge around travel, we heard this morning in an earlier session that older people don't like the tube, they don't like the Elizabeth line, they want to get on a bus. And the question was asked in 2017, where will these buses go? It still hasn't been answered. So my question to TfL would be, how do you support people who have mobility issues who can and will only use the bus and won't use the Elizabeth line? In addition to that, remind me of the step-free access on the Jubilee line. I know that stops up there, and I think it's the Bakerloo line. Is there any step-free access at all? And also public toilets. The Elizabeth line station is absolutely wonderful. I use it regularly. No public toilets. We certainly know the old two tube stations don't have any public toilets. So if we're going to build an accessible space, where are these public toilets coming from? And who will manage them? Who will pay for them? Will it be the GLA?
If I could just take the point on bus passengers and particularly the needs of people from protected groups. It is absolutely a central consideration for us in terms of rerouting. And when we talk about the 2017 scheme, TfL did develop in detail proposals for where the bus route changes would need to be made, and we did look at rerouting buses via Wigmore Street. But as I say, the situation in terms of the number and the routes has changed very, very significantly over that period. So it's something we would absolutely need to do again. And considering where we place those stops to ensure that they're accessible in terms of people being able to get to the shops and other draws on Oxford Street is critical. But also, I'd highlight that taxis, private hire vehicles are key considerations in part of this. So it won't necessarily be that we are talking about a blanket pedestrianisation across Oxford Street. You need to recognise there are important north-south movements on Oxford Street, and we would need to maintain certain of those, both for those priority users, but also for servicing and deliveries, where you can put blue badge bays to ensure people can get close to the premises that they want to visit. All of those are key points that we will need to work through.
I have to admit we haven't quite got to the detailed design stage of looking at toilets yet, but obviously the space and how it needs to be accessible for everybody. But we don't have I haven't got any detailed plans on that yet.
Excuse me, I accept you haven't got that far along in the detail. I just make a plea for toilets. But sorry, TfL, you did not say anything about step-free access.
So Importantly, when the Elizabeth line was delivered, it provided step-free access right along the central route. So stations such as Bond Street, Tottenham Court Road are now accessible. We are also looking in more detail at other stations which are not yet. So, for example, Marble Arch is not yet step-free access. We have developed up initial proposals for that, and we've been in discussions with the landowners and other stakeholders in the area around that. So it's not that we're simply sitting there in terms of saying, this is the current situation and that's what you've got to live with. We continue to look at all of our stations in terms of what are the opportunities for step-free and what are the opportunities, importantly, to work with local partners, because this is not work that TfL can fund alone. Some of the Victorian infrastructure that we're talking about is very, very expensive in terms of the modifications that are required.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Bearing in mind, I'm just 1 minute, and I beg your indulgence for just a few minutes more. Bearing in Mr. Rowe, bearing in mind that it's the bus issue that which kept previous plans for pedestrianisation from going forward, don't you think it would be a good idea to be a bit more open about what those routes are now going to look like, in order to get the confidence of the public that the MDC will be able to deliver pedestrianisation without clogging the streets around?
So, as I said, buses are a central consideration for us. We have been undertaking surveys in terms of usage, in terms of what are those opportunities, but I wouldn't want to preempt the outcome of the current consultation and develop up proposals in detail until we know whether there is support for pedestrianisation in principle. We know from previous surveys that that's the case, but obviously we've tried to be as far-reaching as possible in terms of the current consultation. Ultimately, I've got finite budget, and I want to ensure I use that on proposals which do have that support and have the confidence, yes, we should move forward with the next stage of development.
Yeah, not persuaded, but Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. On the line of questioning on bus routes, now, it was my written question about the fatalities and the injuries as a result of the collisions on Oxford Street that highlighted the issue. But if you're saying that we're going to have better prospects in terms of safety within Oxford Street, what about the other streets that are going to be impacted by the bus routes and the changes? So has there been any assessment on the safety of those surrounding streets that may be impacted by an increase of buses?
So that is part of the information that we've gathered, and we keep ongoing records in relation to safety. But I would draw back to the scheme that we previously developed when we looked at pedestrianisation of Oxford Street West. This was not just about Oxford Street itself. It did encompass changes to the surrounding roads. So, for example, where we looked to reroute buses, we ensured that we provided formal pedestrian crossings at each of the junctions, as well as at appropriate locations where we knew there'd be pedestrian demand. We looked at pavement widths. We also looked at the parallel roads in terms of cyclists and the provision of safe routes for cycling in the area. And you heard from Councillor Hugg earlier about the work that was done with us in terms of, separate to this scheme, but consideration of a route to the north for cyclists along George Street as an example. And those are the types of schemes which we would develop up in more detail.
Thank you. And David, continuing on... Yeah, so, yeah.
So could I just add one thing to that, Assembly Member? I think one of the reasons why the collision rates are so high on Oxford Street itself is also down to the pedestrian density and the types of people who are then spending time in that space. Often, the pavements are exceptionally crowded. There is particular stress on there, particularly at certain times of day and at times of year. Yeah, and the types of people who are often visiting London, yeah, and maybe are less familiar with the traffic patterns and and the spaces may be more familiar with pedestrianised high streets and retail areas elsewhere in the world. So there is a particular problem along Oxford Street, which is the interaction of the traffic that exists at the moment, both during the day where it is taxi and buses, but also at night when there is wider vehicles, and the type of use that the pedestrians are getting in that space. So again, that is something that needs to be tackled into commitment to the Mayor's Vision Zero strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I was only on Oxford Street actually on Eid. We were celebrating as a family, and it was absolutely around there. So, and it's something that the Liberal Democrats themselves have been pushing for pedestrianisation since 2004. So you know, I'm coming from a position of support for this going forwards, but we do need to make sure that we're doing it the right way and that we are consulting properly. Now, the equality impact assessment that the Mayor himself has, that we've actually got back, has actually said that bus access and people who use buses, those people tend to be older people, disabled people, ethnic minorities, lower incomes, pregnant women. And there's quite a significant amount of people who will be impacted by the fact that there are the push away from buses on Oxford Street. How are you going to mitigate the issues, particularly around the disabled and older London people who'll be impacted by this change?
I just wanted to make one quick point on the EQIA comment. You're absolutely right that is, needs to be considered, and I think colleagues have spoken to that. But I just wanted to point out that there's also benefits to those same groups around those overcrowding issues. The ability to sit, which pregnant women, disabled folks, etc., really do need the opportunity to sit and rest, and there would be more opportunities for that if Oxford Street was pedestrianised. So I think what the EQIA pointed out is that absolutely there are considerations around buses, but those same impacted groups would also get benefits from the scheme.
So you're absolutely right, and it's part of TfL's public sector equality duty that we look very carefully at those particular users, and what we do is we analyse both in terms of the overall levels of usage of our service as well as those particular characteristics that you spoke about and how they would be impacted. So any change, we would want to absolutely ensure that we've considered that and sought to minimise any impacts, both in terms of, as I said, the sort of stopping locations as well as the routes, to ensure that we can continue to provide provision. I do draw back to the point, though, that we have seen a very significant change in terms of bus uses within this part of London, more so than almost anywhere else, because of the Elizabeth line that runs parallel to this and what it's meant in terms of the changing nature of bus use in this part.
And we were just discussing the consultation earlier. Now, we need to make sure we get that right as well. And so how are you going to ensure that disabled Londoners and representatives from those communities like Inclusion London, Transport all feel that they can respond to the consultation properly? Because back in 2017, many members of the disabled community in the last consultation were hampered by technical errors, the fact that their responses were not received or lost. So are you making sure that this doesn't happen again?
May I come in on that, just to point out that we're working closely with teams at the GLA that are particularly focused on reaching underrepresented groups, whether that's minority ethnic groups, religious groups, disabled groups, etc., to push out the consultation and ensure that they have sight of it, that they're aware of it. It's gone out in a community's newsletter that they send out, but they're also reaching out to those groups individually to really encourage Londoners as a whole from all different backgrounds and protected characteristics to be able to respond.
And it's not just a digital approach that that we need to have, because the deaf and disabled Londoners, are they going to be fully be able to participate in the consultation, and will there be more in-person processes within the consultation so that residents feel really heard?
I think that we're open to considering whatever those communities need in order to respond effectively. And we're still in the midst of the consultation, so there's absolutely still time for those conversations. And we're being led by our colleagues who have the expertise working with those groups and making sure that they...
So have you got anything in place right now for in-person consultation methods?
I can say that we're meeting with all interested parties that reach out to us in person as needed. So we're absolutely open to that, willing to do that, and already having those in-person engagements as they're requested. I don't think we've said no to any requests.
Will, you talked about international comparisons. Have you looked at the way consultations were run and making sure the mistakes weren't made that were perhaps made in international examples that you've been referring to?
So I think actually London does very well in terms of its engagement in consultations, particularly compared with other places around the world. I don't want to disparage other cities, but we do focus very hard on this issue because we recognise how important it is that everybody has their say, including the production of materials that are accessible for all, irrespective. You mentioned people partially sighted, for example, and that sort of thing. So in terms of, I'm proud of the way that London actually delivers a lot of its consultations and its engagement. However, as you said, there are always lessons to be learned, and that's a continual process of improvement. We have taken on board feedback from previous consultations, not just in terms of Oxford Street plans, but consultations irrespective, whether that's within the JLA, TfL, but also learning from the great work that boroughs do in this space as well. And that's part of continuous improvement that we all recognise that, however, we might be making progress, there's always more progress to be made in that space.
I mean, obviously, then the need to trust the process and bring communities together is going to be part of the success of pedestrianisation. Also in the planning aspect, David, maybe you could help me with this question. I've been, the Liberal Democrats have been pushing for a disability champion to be part of the process in terms of the beginning stages of planning. Is that something that you will consider as well, to make sure that there is a real voice from the disabled community with lived experience to be part of that planning process?
Can I just pick up on your earlier question that Will and Molly responded to, in that we have also sought to ensure that we can learn lessons where they're still fresh from other areas as well, in terms of both the consultation as well as how we develop the scheme. So, for example, we had Bloomberg over quite recently who were involved in Times Square to understand their experiences and help inform how we could potentially move forward with this scheme. In terms of the issues that you've raised as we develop the proposals, absolutely. Accessibility, key consideration for us, and ensuring that we have both the relevant expertise as well as the engagement. Now, TfL has its own consultation group of represented interests in terms of ensuring that we gather those views back, but we are looking more broadly at how best we can do that, and it is one of the work streams that we've identified as critical to moving forward.
And on all of this, you know, the need to make sure that the experience that anyone who visits Oxford Street is still the same experience, whether it's pedestrianised or not. It has to have that pull of people from all over the world wanting to visit London and go to Oxford Street and spend their money. Now, one of the things I raised with the last panel was that iconic aspect of Oxford Street. Are you worried about the loss of the iconic part of the fact that there are buses and taxis on Oxford Street that bring that kind of particular type of customer or tourist or you know, particular groups of people to Oxford Street?
No, I don't think that the buses or the taxis are what makes Oxford Street iconic. I think that helps make London iconic, and it's a key part of London transport. But there are plenty of bits of London which don't have either buses or on. And I think what makes Oxford Street iconic is the space itself, is the buildings, is the use of that space. And I think by removing the traffic in that space, it will make it even more iconic, make it more of a destination so that more people feel comfortable, safe, and want to spend more time there, bringing new attractions and modernising this. So it really is a first-class 21st century high street that is a international example of best practice. So I don't think, you know, you could go down to the end of the road at either end and see buses and taxis. On Regent Street, you will still see buses and taxis. There will be plenty of opportunities to still see those iconic modes of transport, but it doesn't necessarily need to be going up and down the street, and it certainly doesn't need to be causing collisions and other challenges that we see at the moment.
I did mention buggies as well in the last panel, and is that something that you are considering? Because I know that Sutton High Street here that has pedestrianised as buggies, but you know, it could be part of the new iconic image of Oxford Street, having something that is fun but also accessible?
I think having some accessible modes of transport for people who have got mobility challenges and impairments, I think, will be very exciting in this space. We have not determined what that might be, but I think colleagues will be aware that we are currently consulting on pedicab legislation at the moment. Now, pedicabs at the moment do operate in Oxford Street and the surrounding areas, and frankly speaking, they are delivering an exceptionally poor service. Yep, I've witnessed only last week an altercation between a pedicab operator and a tourist trying to charge them £500 from travelling from Old Street to Oxford Circus. Yep. Now that is exactly what we do not need in terms of creating that experience for Londoners. That's why we need to change that legislation. But I think that will then operate, whether they are shuttles, pedicabs, will not operate. It will bring new opportunities, to actually ensure that there's a diversity of modes that can actually provide access in the space.
Thank you. Now, I'm just going to move on to cycling. It was suggested in 2017 proposal that cycling would be prohibited in the pedestrianisation part of Oxford Street. So, David, if cycling is prohibited on Oxford Street, what would the alternative cycling routes be, and when would they be delivered?
So similarly, the consultation this time makes reference to the fact that cyclists would not necessarily be allowed within the space, and we would be developing up those detailed plans with Westminster and with Camden around what are the appropriate parallel routes both to the north and the south to ensure there's provision. Importantly, we're not going from a standing start. There has been a lot of work already within this area since that scheme took place, since we developed the scheme back in 2017, as well as proposals that Westminster have already consulted on in terms of the route to the north. So there's good work that we can build on, but we know we need to go further. I think the other consideration, not only for cyclists, but more generally in terms of access to Oxford Street, is that I mentioned before, this is not going to be a sort of blanket area where there is nobody allowed. We still need to make provision for waiting and loading, for loading and servicing, for example, on Oxford Street. So it may well be certain hours over the nighttime period that takes place, and similarly you could envisage that would allow other users, such as cyclists, back onto the route during those times.
So, I mean, it looks like that there would be good collaboration between yourselves and Westminster City Council going forward with cycle routes, bus routes, etc. But will there be a sufficient enough guarantee through the plans that you have that it doesn't matter who is politically in charge of Westminster Council, that things going forward will continue going progressively and making sure that this is a success? Because I think there is some anxiety about the fact that there was a new council that came in with new leadership, bang, the mayor makes a decision about pedestrianisation, and there is some cynicism over that, and we don't want to hamper the progress that's needed. Will there be a guarantee that it doesn't matter who's running the council, whatever political party, that we will see progress?
I think we have seen, to David's points, we have seen a lot of progress. And working with the council, I was out on street the other day, with the new head of highways and the new cabinet lead for transport, looking at some of the cycling provision. Going back to David's point, having thousands of cyclists going through a new pedestrianised area would not bring all those benefits that we want to see along Oxford Street. I think it would make an extremely unpleasant pedestrianised area if you had 4,000 cyclists moving through there. Having worked with the previous council, irrespective of the leadership of the council, I think there's a shared goal, irrespective of any party, of actually ensuring that people are safe on our roads, irrespective of what mode they're on. I'm confident that will continue. Obviously, the MDC will sit outside of those local political structures. There will be political representation from the councils on the MDC, and that will be a vital part of how those councils work with the MDC in terms of the future. But that will be, that will be a mayoral, the clue's in the name, I suppose, and that there will be a mayoral development corporation.
Thank you. You've been very kind with your time. We've gone a little bit over. There's just two very small questions I want to ask about consultation. How will you make up for the massive democratic deficit brought about by these plans?
Sorry, in terms of the consultation.
I understand you're addressing consultation, but fundamentally you have currently decisions are being made about Oxford Street, which are made by 54 people, all of whom have a mandate from the people of Westminster Council. You're reducing that down to 2, who are appointed by the mayor to a board of 13. That is a huge deficit in terms of accountability. How do you make up for that?
So with all the MDCs across the other MDCs, there is representative boards, so both within LLDC and in terms of Old Oak, and that will then, obviously there's democratic accountability through both the Assembly and your role and the Mayor.
Just to let you know, I asked the same question of the 2 previous, when the 2 previous MDCs were set up, and they weren't satisfactory either. But you are reducing the decision-making to a couple of people from Westminster Council, whereas it was previously 54, all with a mandate. So that, how do you make up for that? How do you prove that residents' concerns are going to be taken into consideration?
Well, I think that is why the makeup of the board of the MDC and any planning committees that the MDC will have will play that role. But there's obviously democratic accountability for an MDC via the Assembly here and the election of the mayor himself.
And will you be hitting the same standards of consultation for the MDC that you did for the ULEZ?
I think the ULEZ was proved exceptionally well. The consultation for the ULEZ was widely responded to. I think it was probably one of the record numbers of responses there, and delivered a very successful scheme. I imagine that this scheme will be doing something similar.
So it'll be the same level of consultation that you delivered on the ULEZ. Same standard of consultation that you delivered on the ULEZ.
I don't fully understand the question.
You know, have you got any lessons that you learnt from the ULEZ consultation that might inform you about the consultation on the MDC?
I think I said previously that we are always learning from our consultations, both within the GLA and within TfL and with the boroughs, and we'll continue to do so.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our guest.
Assembly member. If I can help you, Chair.
Really quick.
If the Mayor was sat in that chair, then I think the response he would give you would be the same response he's given me when I questioned him over the Blackwall and Silvertown Tunnel. He would say it's a consultation, not a referendum. So effectively, whatever people say, it doesn't matter.
Thank you. As is well pointed out, thank you very much for answering our questions today. I really do appreciate it. We've now reached the end of the second panel discussion. The committee has a few more items of business to deal with, but please feel free to leave. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion?
Agreed.
Can I ask the committee to note the work programme, the additional activity undertaken since the last meeting, namely the site visit to the New London Architecture Office as part of the committee's investigation into planning and tall buildings?
Noted.
The London Assembly's annual meeting, due to take place in 2025, will decide which committees to establish for the 2025 Assembly year and a timetable of meetings for these committees. So the next meeting committee will be confirmed in due course. I have no urgent business, which concludes today's meeting. Thank you.
The home of the Greater London Authority.